I cared for her for 5 years, but my mother's sobs could be heard from the audience as tears welled up in my husband's eyes. He's done nothing for all this time, yet he plays the good son so well. I'm the only one who knows the truth. You better realize this, John. I started, playing the audio evidence that would reveal my husband's true nature. My name is Sarah. I've been married to John for 7 years now. Currently, we live as a family of 3 with my bedridden mother-in-law. 5 years ago, her illness forced her into a bedridden lifestyle. My father-in-law had passed away before I got married, so there was no one else to care for her. At the time, John's work wasn't going well, and we were struggling to make ends meet. So he asked if we could live together with his mother, and she agreed. Feeling guilty about relying on her, I decided to take care of her while also working a part-time job. My mother-in-law seemed to feel guilty about being cared for. I continued, recounting how she often tried to reassure me. Sarah, that's enough. Please don't worry about me. I always encouraged her with a strong will, I recalled. When she said this with a troubled smile, I replied, What are you talking about? I'm indebted to you, mother-in-law. But it must be hard with both work and housework, plus taking care of me. I don't want to burden you anymore, Sarah, she insisted. It's not a burden at all. I want to be with you. That's why I'm doing this on my own accord. I reassured her. But you should have your own happiness. Being able to talk to you every day like this is my happiness, so don't worry about it. Tears welled up in mother-in-law's eyes as she whispered a small thank you. There's not much that I can do, yet she always expresses her gratitude like this. Ever since we got married, my mother-in-law has been very kind to me, so taking care of her is not a burden at all. In fact, it feels like my mission. While I do enjoy caring for her, there's one thing I'm not satisfied with in my current life. My husband, John. He's what you'd call a traditional type who thinks housework is a woman's job. He wasn't that bad when we got married, but since we started living with his parents, he's become increasingly selfish. He doesn't contribute much to the household expenses, but his entitlement is as high as Everest. For instance, when he comes home, he starts yelling if I don't greet him at the door. Hey Sarah, I'm home. Why aren't you greeting me? Hurry up, get my stuff. I frowned at my husband and voiced my complaints. Listen, John, I've told you before, I'm not your servant. You should do what you can on your own. Huh? What are you saying? Who do you think is making the money for this family? Yes, it's true that you're providing for us, but I'm also doing my part. I'm working part-time. Despite that, you speak to me like this. Shut up. Your earnings are just peanuts. You can't survive without me, so don't you dare defy me. And you? You can't even contribute properly to the living expenses. The only reason we can live in this house is undoubtedly thanks to your mother. At first, I would fight back, but my husband started threatening divorce every time we quarreled. Watch yourself, Sarah. Keep this up and we'll get a divorce, got it? Please, not so loud. Your mother is in the other room. Shut it. It's all because you're so insolent. Understand this. You'd be the one in trouble if we divorced. Do you get that? Just lower your voice and don't always talk about divorce like that. Yeah, right. You would have nowhere to go if we got divorced. Besides, there's no company out there willing to hire a scrub like you full-time, Sarah. Stop talking like that. Just shut up and listen to what I'm saying. You idiot. You're so slow. Honestly, I was more than ready to divorce my husband, but when I thought of my mother-in-law, I couldn't bring myself to go through with it. You can always talk to me if you're troubled, Sarah. You're my precious daughter, my mother-in-law would reassure me. She was always very kind to me, as if we were truly mother and daughter. Because of her, I wanted to take care of her properly until the end. I wanted to repay her for all the kindness she had shown me. That's why I endured the painful days with my husband in this house. I couldn't entrust my mother-in-law's care to a man like him. Then one day, as I was preparing dinner, I heard the usual shouting from the entrance. Hey Sarah, I'm home. Come out and greet me. I'm using the stove right now and can't leave it. What, are you kidding me? What kind of wife doesn't prioritize her husband? My husband, who had lost his patience, stormed into the living room. Hey, what are you thinking? I always tell you to greet me when I come home. Why don't you understand? As you can see, I was just frying something. I don't care. You should have timed it to be finished when I come home. You're useless. Well, you never tell me when you'll be home. I told you not to talk back. A useless and insolent wife is nothing but garbage. My mother-in-law, who had come out upon hearing the harsh words, spoke in a stern voice. John, that is no way to talk, is it? Oh, Mom, You're still alive. Sarah is working hard every day for this household for both of you and me. That's what a wife is supposed to do, right? She earns a little, is half-baked in housekeeping. She's basically social trash. Enough is enough. My usually quiet mother-in-law raised her voice on the spot. You wouldn't say what you want about me. Don't you dare slander Sarah. What, Mom? Are you on Sarah's side too? You two are colluding, huh? My mother-in-law, who usually remains silent, continued to speak. This time, John, one request. Ha! What is it? Just put me in a nursing home. I don't want to be a burden on Sarah anymore. Ha! A nursing home. Where do you think we have that kind of money? We still have your father's inheritance and my pension. I don't need a fancy place. At my mother-in-law's unexpected remark, I was at a loss for words. Mother-in-law, have you been considering this? Thinking about me? Tears welled up in my eyes at the thought of her kindness. However, it was completely lost on my husband. At the suggestion, he made a deeply disgusted face. Don't joke around. There's no way we're putting you in a nursing home. That's a waste of money. Please don't say that. Life would be easier in this house if I wasn't here. If we put you in a facility, the neighbors and my colleagues will start gossiping that I'm an ungrateful son, won't they? You don't need to worry about what people think. I still want to be a burden to you. Then shut up and do as you're told, old woman. I'm taking care of you, isn't that enough? John, you don't do anything. Huh? I let you live in this house and I make Sarah work too. Isn't that enough for you, ungrateful woman? Unable to bear my husband's words, I raised my voice. Are you talking about who's the ungrateful one here? This house originally belonged to your mother, didn't it? Ah, are you talking back to me again? But that's true, isn't it? 5 years ago, when you were fired, we were in trouble, and didn't your mother-in-law gladly take us in? How can you say that? Ah, shut up, both of you. And I'm not doing this reluctantly. I'm taking care of mother-in-law out of my own will. Stop making unilateral decisions. Despite my desperate plea, my husband just said, "That's true. Troublesome," and left the room. In the awkward silence, my mother-in-law kept apologizing and crying. It's not your fault, mother-in-law. The one at fault is John. Every day, I was frustrated by a reality that I could not control. A few days later, while I was cleaning the house, a man who claimed to be an acquaintance of my mother-in-law's came to visit. Mother-in-law looked surprised, but she wore a full smile. Oh, is that you, Jackson? You came to visit. Well, if I was asked to visit my senior Linda, I couldn't refuse, could I? I remember treating you a lot at work when we were younger, right? Yes, I'm grateful. So what's your will? Why did you call me today? Ah, yes, actually, looking at me, mother-in-law said, sorry, could you step out for a bit? Assuming they had a lot to catch up on, I happily agreed, saying, sure, and went out to buy some sweets. This man Jackson apparently was a junior when mother-in-law was working. It had been a while since I saw mother-in-law looking so happy. When I thought it was time to come back, Jackson was just about to leave. Oh, excuse me, I'm about to make tea. No, that's fine. We finished our conversation, but thank you for always taking care of Linda. She's a benefactor to me, so it's reassuring to know that she has a daughter like you. He bowed his head to me and left. Since then, Jackson has been regularly visiting mother-in-law, and they always have a lively conversation. It was a few months later that my mother-in-law's condition worsened, and she had to be rushed to the hospital. When I urgently called my husband, he responded with disbelief. My mom's in danger. As if I care. You're there, you can handle it. But the doctor said her condition's unpredictable. Please, I need you. Ah, no way. Plus, I'm leaving for a business trip today. What now? Of all times, please try to cancel it. Are you stupid? There's no way I can do that. Handle it on your own and don't call me until I reach out first. With that, he hung up abruptly. Not knowing what to do, I slumped down in front of my mother-in-law's hospital room. He's going on a business trip while his mother is in this state? This is just too cruel. How am I supposed to tell my mother-in-law? Just as I was sinking into despair, Jackson appeared. Oh, Sarah, what's wrong? Ah, Jackson. Something happened, right? Let's go to your mother-in-law's room for now. Okay. When we entered the room, my mother-in-law looked at us and struggled to speak. Jackson, you're here. So, does that mean you did what I asked? Yeah, but are you sure about this? Of course. I have to clear things up before I go, don't I? I understand. Then my mother-in-law weakly took my hand. Sarah, there's something I want you to know. What is it? My son has been withdrawing money from my account for his pension and spending it on his mistress. An affair? He's a man who treated me like a maid. I had some idea from the start, but to think he was even taking money from his mother's pension. I asked Jackson to investigate the matter. I see, so that's why my mother-in-law called Jackson to the house. Jackson, please record what I'm about to say. It will be my last will. Understood, Linda. Jackson slowly took out a voice recorder. Once he finished recording everything, he placed it in my hand. How you use this recording is up to you, Sarah. Up to me? Yes, I'm the only one who can avenge my mother-in-law. I squeezed her frail hand back with strength. The next day, my mother-in-law passed away, leaving her final revenge in my hands. On the day of the funeral, 2 days later, my mother-in-law, who had always been popular, drew a large crowd. Seeing this, my husband made an inappropriate comment. Wow, I didn't expect so many people to come. It's a great opportunity to show off my skills as chief mourner. What are you talking about? You weren't even there when she died. Ignoring my reproach, he continued casually, I'll make everyone cry with my touching eulogy. My bosses from work are here too. If they're moved by how filial I am, it could boost my reputation and lead to a promotion. Just kidding. How can you act like this when your mother just passed away? Just think about it. Now that mom's gone, I'll get dad's inheritance, right? Man, I'm so lucky. Ignoring my trembling rage, my husband cheerfully went on to give the eulogy. After the formalities, he began talking about taking care of his mother. Then, with tears in his eyes, he said, I have devoted myself to caring for my mother for 5 years, but in vain. She has passed away. But I have no regrets. I am proud that I could support my mother until the end. At my husband's eulogy, sobs could be heard from the audience. Perhaps pleased with the reaction, my husband continued to speak indefinitely with a touch of drama as if he had always been a dutiful son. The attendees, oblivious, listened to this story with tears in their eyes. Thank you all for today, he concluded. With his closing words, I stood up. As the room began to stir, I stood before my husband and took out a voice recorder. What are you doing? Ignoring my husband's restraint, I raised my voice to the attendees. Ladies and gentlemen, finally, please listen to this recording. As I pressed the play button, my mother-in-law's voice flowed from the voice recorder. Her voice at that time, recorded in the hospital. Thank you all for attending today. There's something I absolutely want you to hear, so I've left this voice message. My husband and even the attendees were stunned by the unexpected turn of events. I believe you've just heard my son's speech. Probably he was talking as if he had been a dutiful son. The recording continued in my mother-in-law's voice that knew my boastful husband well. She had a good grasp of his likely behavior as a parent. I increased the volume of the voice recorder so that everyone could hear. However, my son did not care for me. He just kept shouting at me and my daughter-in-law, Sarah. Of course, we have audio evidence of him verbally abusing Sarah and me. As my husband's face turned red, he shouted, What is this? Stop this. Ignoring him, I continued to play the recording. Besides, hi son, I was withdrawing my pension from my account without my permission. I'm giving it to another woman, not Sarah. One day, I noticed something odd about my son and had an old friend look into it, and this fact came to light. The attendees were all filled with anger, while my husband turned pale. Finally, my mother-in-law delivered a final blow to my husband from heaven. I have a request for everyone. Please do not give my inheritance to my son. You could donate it, destroy it, whatever. Anyway, I will not forgive my son. I need your help. With those words, the voice ceased. My husband was in a panic, shouting something, but no one was there to help him. On the contrary, all of the attendees were giving him cold stares. Looking down at my husband, I said coldly, Do you understand? This is the result of what you've been doing. You abandoned the care of your mother and were having an affair. You've learned a lot from this, haven't you? Wait, Sarah, I was wrong. So, you are not going to say something stupid like, help me, are you? Let me tell you, I will never forgive you. After tormenting your mother and ridiculing people, there's no one who's going to help you. Suffer in hell. In the midst of the attendees' cold stares, my husband collapsed onto the ground, pale-faced. After that, I divorced my husband. There was no reason for me to be with him now that my mother-in-law had passed away. I later heard that he had been fired from his job. His boss had been at the funeral, so it was a predictable outcome. I demanded alimony from my ex-husband for his mistress. Apparently, his mistress was furious about this and promptly dumped him. A few months later, my ex-husband was able to find a new job through Jackson's introduction, but that was also part of my mother-in-law's plan. My ex-husband was working at a company known to Jackson, and from his salary, he was paying me alimony. Thanks to this, the alimony is paid to me every month without fail. Meanwhile, I started living alone with the money my mother-in-law had left me. Jackson, who was worried about me, even introduced me to a full-time job. All of this was apparently in my mother-in-law's will. I can't thank my mother-in-law enough for everything she's done for me. I said a prayer in front of my mother-in-law's grave and thanked her in my heart. Thank you so much, mother-in-law. I swore to myself that I would cherish this life I was given thanks to my mother-in-law.
Chadley, you're going to be a great dad. Thank you for being here. I froze. The voice coming from the DVD player felt like a knife to my heart. I stood in Chadley's office, clutching a dust rag, staring at the screen where a woman, bedridden and sweating, gripped the hand of my husband. Oh my God. Is that my husband's voice? I murmured, unable to tear my eyes away. Liz, Helen's voice broke my trance. She stepped into the room, her face a mask of concern. I think you should put this DVD back for now. We'll figure this out. I ejected the DVD, my hands trembling as I placed it back in its case, careful not to look at the printed label that stared back at me. Rachel's baby. Helen closed the office door behind us as we left. When we were in the kitchen, Helen poured 2 cups of coffee and sat across the table from me. Liz, I know this is shocking, but let's stay calm. We need to understand what's going on. I grasped my cup, trying to draw warmth from it, but it only made the growing chill inside me more apparent. But if it's true, what does it mean for us? Helen sighed, staring into her coffee. We need to find out more before jumping to conclusions. I'll support you, no matter what we discover. She reached out and squeezed my hand, her touch grounding me for a moment. That night, sleep came reluctantly. My mind was a carousel of images. Chadley in the delivery room, his soothing whispers to this woman, Rachel. Part of me wanted to confront him right away, but Helen's words echoed in my mind. We needed answers, and hasty actions wouldn't bring them. In the morning, Helen suggested we hire a private investigator. Liz, you're running your business and dealing with enough stress. Let professionals handle this. You're right. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight on my shoulders, but trying to stay strong. I'll call someone today. By noon, I had an appointment set with Jake Fulton, a private investigator. I want to know everything about Rachel and Chadley's involvement, I told him as we sat in his small office. Jake nodded, his expression one of practiced empathy. We'll get the answers you need. I'll start right away. Over the next few days, Helen and I kept our conversations to necessary topics. Chadley noticed my distant demeanor, but attributed it to my workload. He had no idea about the storm brewing. Jake reported back quickly. Rachel Miller, he began, unfolding what seemed like a saga about my husband's other life. Chadley's frequent business trips, many were visits to her. She lives just 2 towns over. As the pieces clicked into place, my anger bubbled but stayed controlled. Any sign of another man? I asked, remembering the name Dan from the dossier Jake handed us. Jake nodded. Dan Parker. He believed he was the father of Rachel's child. Helen and I decided we needed to talk to Dan. Maybe he had answers or pieces of the puzzle we still missed. Meeting him at a local diner, the air was thick with tension. Dan, we need to talk about Rachel, I began, feeling a strange camaraderie with this man I had never met. His eyes widened with mixed emotions. What's this about? He demanded. Through shared pain, we pieced together a story of deception. Dan had been as fooled as I was. Together, we planned to confront Rachel and Chadley, 2 deceivers caught in their web of lies. Helen's eyes gleamed with determination the next morning. We need to set the stage for this revelation properly. I gave a weary smile. Chadley's birthday is coming up. Perfect timing, isn't it? She nodded. Everyone deserves to know the truth, Liz. But how? I asked, the enormity of the task weighing on me. We'll figure it out, Helen assured me, squeezing my hand once more. We have to. The plan was set in motion. Secrets ready to be unveiled, actions poised to shatter our facades. The kitchen table turned into our war room. Helen and I sifted through the evidence Jake had gathered. Photos, receipts, and notes on Chadley's movements painted a picture of betrayal. "There's no denying it now," Helen said, her voice steady but eyes glistening with a mix of anger and sadness. "We have to face reality." I nodded, clutching a receipt from a fancy hotel I had never visited. "It's worse than I imagined." The tears I had been holding back began to fall. Helen reached over, her hand warm and comforting. "Liz, don't panic. We need to understand what's going on. Jumping to conclusions won't help. But if it's true, what does it mean for us?" I choked out, the enormity of the situation hitting me all at once. Helen took a deep breath. "It means we need to be smart about our next steps. You'll take a break from your business. We'll hire a lawyer to protect your interests." My life felt like it was spiraling out of control. I had to keep my composure, not just for myself, but for the future. I still hoped I could rebuild from this mess. I trusted Helen's wisdom. She had been a rock and a second mother to me. When nighttime fell, the house felt foreign. Chadley came home, kissed my cheek absent-mindedly, and retreated to his study. I sat stiffly on the couch, trying to act normal. The sound of his laughter on old nights felt like a cruel joke now. The following day, I found myself in the polished office of Kim Hathaway, a seasoned family lawyer. Helen joined us for moral support. "Liz, tell me what you know so far," Kim prompted, her eyes sharp and attentive. I handed her the folder of evidence we had compiled. "I want to know what can be done. I think he has another family." Kim's face softened, but her professional demeanor remained intact. "First, we'll file for a separation. I'll also get a restraining order if necessary. Let's take it step by step." Her words gave me a sense of direction. "What about Rachel? Is there any legal action we can take against her too?" Kim leaned back, contemplating. "If she's defrauded you and Dan, there might be grounds, but we need irrefutable evidence first." We thanked her and left the office with a clearer plan. My resolve hardened with each step I took. I had lost enough sleep, enough joy. It was time to reclaim some control. Back home, Helen and I reviewed the newly gained information about Dan. The man seemed genuine, as hurt by Rachel's lies as I was. We decided to confront him directly, hoping to form a united front. Meeting Dan had been tense, but oddly cathartic. Joining forces felt like a step toward justice. The next big hurdle was Rachel. We tracked her down to a small cafe she frequented. Helen and I walked in, our presence immediately capturing Reel's attention. Her smile vanished, replaced by a mask of wariness. "Rachel," I began, my voice surprisingly steady, "we need to talk. Now." She hesitated, then nodded, motioning us to a secluded corner. Her discomfort mirrored my own. "What do you want?" Rachel asked, eyes darting between us. "Answers," I replied firmly. "We know about Chadley and the child." Her eyes flashed with something. Guilt, fear, perhaps both. "I don't know what you think you know," she started. "No games," Helen interjected, her voice cold but controlled. "We have evidence. Your lies end here." Rachel's shoulders slumped slightly, and I could see the fight leaving her. She realized the game was up. "Fine," she said quietly. "I'll tell you everything." Her admission felt like a victory, but also a bitter confirmation of our worst fears. The path ahead was clear now. We needed to expose Chadley, and it began with a confrontation that would shake our family to its core. My fingers tapped restlessly on the desk as Jake updated me on the latest findings. The private investigator's office felt suffocating, crammed with files and the scent of stale coffee. "Liz," Jake started, adjusting his glasses. "We've uncovered more about Rachel. She's been living off Chadley's money. They've also co-signed on an apartment lease." Helen gripped my shoulder, her fury barely concealed. "So he's been funding her life while we struggled? Unbelievable." I sank deeper into my chair, feeling a cocktail of betrayal and determination. "And Dan? What's his involvement?" Jake handed over a series of surveillance photos. "Rachel's been stringing him along, making him believe he's the father. He's been covering additional expenses, private school applications, medical bills." Helen's eyes narrowed. "Rachel's been playing everyone for fools." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "What about business trips? How often did he visit her?" "More than half," Jake replied, flipping through some documents. "She lives in a neighboring town, but they met up during business trips too. She has proof of their meetings, texts and emails." "Rachel's been smart," Helen muttered, "but not smart enough." There was a pause before Jake spoke again. What's the next step for you, Liz? I clenched my fists. I want every detail exposed. Let's talk to the lawyer. That woman, Rachel, she must be held accountable too. Kim Hathaway's office was as pristine as ever. She listened intently as we described Rachel's manipulations. Liz, Kim began, your situation warrants comprehensive action. We'll start with legal separation from Chadley. Gathering more concrete proof of the fraud will be vital. What about Rachel? I asked. We could potentially charge her with fraud, Kim said, her eyes sharp. But we need irrefutable evidence. I nodded. We have to move fast. Chadley's birthday is approaching. It's the perfect chance to confront them both. Back at home, Helen and I busied ourselves with preparations. I had to act normal around Chadley, which made my skin crawl. Each time he smiled or tried to be affectionate, felt like a betrayal all over again. The day before Chadley's birthday party, Helen and I met up with Dan. We filled him in on our plan, and he seemed ready for a showdown. You have to confront them at the party, Dan, I said, feeling more like a general than a woman whose life was falling apart. Everyone will be there, family, friends, they need to see the truth. Dan looked grim but determined. I'll be there. The day of the party arrived. Helen and I moved through the motions of hosting as if everything was perfect. Guests filled the living room, laughing and chatting, unaware of the storm brewing. Chadley entered, surprised by the gathering, friends clapping, Helen hugging him. Happy birthday, echoed through the house. I forced a smile, knowing the moment was near. As the cake was being cut, I nodded to Dan, who had positioned himself near the entertainment center. He gave us the signal and quietly inserted the damning DVD. The room darkened as the screen sprang to life. Liz, what the hell are you doing? Chadley's voice was sharp, cutting through the room's cheerful atmosphere. Silence. Chadley, watch, Helen demanded, her voice steady even as my heart pounded in my chest. Gasps filled the room as the video played. Chadley's comforting coos to Rachel as she pushed through labor, his gentle touch that had once been reserved for me, now public for everyone to see. The shockwaves of revelation rippled through the assembly. Family members whispered, friends looked horrified. I stepped forward, feeling strength surge through my veins. This is who Chadley really is, I declared, living a double life, with Rachel, who stole your trust and love, Dan. Dan stepped up, his voice resolute. We have proof of their betrayal. DNA tests show Chadley isn't the father. Rachel lied. The room descended into chaos, but in the middle of it, I felt an unexpected calm. The lies were exposed, and the path to justice had begun. The room was a cauldron of confusion and disbelief. Chadley's face turned ashen, beads of sweat forming on his brow as he locked eyes with me. Liz, you had no right. Save it, I snapped, my voice slicing through his excuses. You lied to all of us. Helen stood beside me, her presence a fortress of support. This has to stop, Chadley. You've hurt too many people. Dan stepped forward, his eyes burning with betrayal. Rachel, we need to talk. About everything. Rachel's eyes darted around the room, looking for an escape. Dan, I can explain. Explain? Dan's voice was sharp. You used me. Lied to me. Chadley tried to regain control of the situation. Everyone, please, let's not make a scene. Too late for that, Helen interjected. You made your choices. Rachel finally found her voice, though it trembled. I never intended for anyone to get hurt. Stop lying, I shouted, feeling my emotions surge. All you did was lie. Rachel turned to Dan, tears streaming down her face. Dan, please, I need you to believe me. He shook his head, disgust shaping his features. You're poison, Rachel, to everyone you touch. Relatives and friends began to whisper, their faces masked in a mix of shock and disgust. No one seemed to side with Chadley or Rachel. It was clear their deceit had dug their own graves. Trying to salvage a shred of dignity, Chadley approached me. Liz, can we talk privately? I took a step back, crossing my arms. There's nothing to talk about, not anymore. Helen raised a hand, signaling for silence. Everyone deserves to know what kind of people Chadley and Rachel are. There should be no secrets left to fester. Seeing he had no allies, Chadley's desperation grew. Liz, please, I'm begging you. Begging is for the guilty, I stated coldly, and you're as guilty as they come. Dan wasn't any more forgiving. Rachel, I'm suing you. Fraud, emotional distress, the works. Rachel collapsed into a chair, finally defeated. I never meant for it to go this far. Helen's eyes were filled with steely determination. Maybe you should have thought of that before betraying everyone you claimed to care about. The room fell into a strained silence, the enormity of the situation starting to settle. Chadley and Rachel looked around, finding only judgment and disdain. Helen and I nodded to each other, an unspoken understanding passing between us. "I'm filing for divorce," I announced, the finality of the words echoing in the stillness. "You're no longer part of my life." Chadley's shoulders slumped. He realized that not only had he lost me, but also the respect of everyone gathered. "Enough," I said, turning away from him. "This is over." With a final glance, Helen and I began to escort our guests out, thanking them for coming and apologizing for the scene. The weight of relief mixed with sorrow felt surreal. As the door closed behind the last guest, Helen looked at me. "We did it, Liz. It's done." I nodded, feeling a tear slide down my cheek. "Thank you for standing by me, Helen. I wouldn't have survived this without you." Helen hugged me tightly. "We're family, and we're stronger than ever." Inside, I knew there were more battles ahead. Legalities, emotional wounds, and rebuilding my life without Chadley. But for now, the first and most important step had been taken, facing the truth head-on and refusing to live a lie. Dan approached us before leaving. "We're in this together now," he said, holding out his hand. I shook it. "Thank you, Dan, for everything." He nodded, grim but resolute. "We'll get through this, all of us." As I closed the door, I felt a strange mix of exhaustion and newfound strength. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for tonight, I was content, knowing the truth had finally seen the light. The shadows were lifting, and with them, the promise of a better future. The days leading up to the confrontation were a blur of preparations. Helen and I decided Chadley's upcoming surprise birthday party would be the perfect moment to unveil the truth. We needed to ensure that everyone who mattered was there. "So, how do we do this?" I asked Helen one afternoon as we sorted through the guest list. "Simple," she said, tapping the list with a pen. "We gather everyone together and play the DVD. The shock will do the rest." The plan was set. Chadley's birthday morning was oddly tranquil. I prepared a light breakfast, trying to act like everything was normal. Chadley, blissfully unaware, joked about his age and what a wonderful wife I was. My smile was tight, but he didn't notice. "Don't forget, we've got that dinner tonight," I said, hiding the tremor in my voice. "Wouldn't miss it for the world," Chadley said with a wink. His affection felt like acid on my skin. The evening arrived, and the house filled with guests. Relatives and close friends chatted, unaware of the drama about to unfold. I spotted Dan lingering near the doorway, and we exchanged nods of encouragement. As we gathered in the living room, I caught Helen's eye. She nodded subtly. "Time to set the stage." "Thank you all for coming," Helen announced, smiling warmly. "We have a special surprise for Chadley." He beamed, looking around at everyone. "You guys shouldn't have. You deserve it," I said, my words double-edged. Helen moved to the TV, inserting the dreaded DVD. As the screen lit up, Chadley looked confused. His confusion turned to horror as Rachel's face appeared, contorted in labor. The room fell silent, all eyes glued to the damning footage. "What is this?" Chadley's voice shook, a mix of anger and panic creeping into his tone. "Keep watching," Helen commanded, her voice icy. The video continued, showing Chadley's intimate moments with Rachel. Gasps filled the room, whispers of disbelief spreading like wildfire. "Liz, turn this off! This is a mistake!" Chadley pleaded, but I shook my head. "No mistakes here, Chadley. Just the truth." Rachel, who had timidly stood at the back, now stepped forward, head bowed. "I'm sorry, everyone." Dan pushed to the front, fury etched on his face. "You think sorry fixes this? You destroyed lives, Rachel." Chadley's face twisted with desperation. "Liz, please, we can talk about this." Helen stepped in front of me, shielding me from his reach. "You've done enough talking, Chadley. It's time everyone knew who you really are." The guests were no longer whispering. Outright exclamations of anger and betrayal echoed through the room. Chadley looked around, realizing no one was on his side. "No more lies," I said firmly. "This marriage is over. I want a divorce." Chadley's shoulders slumped in defeat. He looked at Rachel, who was crying. "Rachel, how could you?" Rachel looked up, her eyes red and swollen. "I never meant to hurt anyone, Chadley," Dan scoffed. "Too late for that. You hurt all of us." Helen, ever the matriarch, faced the crowd. "Now you all know the truth. These two have betrayed us. The only thing left is justice." The room was filled with a mix of redemption and sorrow. It was the end of an era for our family, but also a new beginning. Chadley and Rachel stood there, exposed and broken. I watched as the last few guests left, unable to shake the sense of finality hovering in the air. Helen turned to me, her eyes filled with both sadness and relief. "We did what needed to be done," she said softly. I nodded, feeling the weight of our actions, but also an unexpected lightness. The truth was out. Now we could begin to heal. "We'll get through this, Liz," Dan said, placing a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "All of us." Helen gave me a tight hug. "We're here for each other now. Always." As I closed the door on that harrowing evening, I felt a strange sense of peace. The storm had passed, and the path ahead, though difficult, was clear. The aftermath of the confrontation hung heavy in the air. Chadley and Rachel were in shambles, their charades demolished. The room had emptied, but the echo of their deceit lingered. "Liz, let's talk," Chadley pleaded, his face an agonized mask. "Please, give me a chance to explain." "There's nothing left to explain," I said coldly, my voice steadier than I felt. "It's over. I'm filing for divorce." He grabbed my arm, desperation tinging his touch. "You can't just end us like this. We've been through so much." Helen stepped forward, prying his hand off me with a firm grip. "Don't you dare touch her, Chadley. You're not welcome here anymore." Chadley's eyes narrowed, anger bubbling beneath the surface. "You always took her side, even when she was wrong." Helen didn't flinch. "I stood by what was right. Clearly, that wasn't you." Rachel stood to the side, sniffling and wiping tears. She eyed Dan, hoping for some sympathy. "Dan, I'm so sorry. Please, we can work this out." Dan's face was etched with betrayal and fury. "Rachel, there's nothing left to work out. You lied to me, to everyone. I'm suing you for fraud. You should get a lawyer." Rachel collapsed into a chair, her sobs growing louder. "I never meant for it to go this far." I watched the scene unfold, feeling an odd mix of vindication and sorrow. The damage was done, and all that was left was to move forward. Chadley turned to me with pleading eyes. "Liz, please, let's not do this. Think about us, our memories, everything we've built." "Everything we built was a lie," I said, my voice thick. "There's no going back." He sank to his knees, head in his hands. "I'll never forgive myself for this." Helen's gaze was steely. "Good. You shouldn't." Dan, weary but resolute, shook his head. "Chadley, Rachel, whatever you hope to salvage, it's gone. You did this to yourselves." It was a strange sight, seeing Chadley, once so composed, now crumbling before me. The room felt too small, filled with the weight of our shattered lives. Helen took my hand, guiding me away from the wreckage. "We have preparations to make," she said softly. "This is just the beginning." The next few days were a whirlwind of legal meetings and paperwork. Kim Hathaway guided us meticulously through the process, ensuring I was protected. Dan was relentless in his pursuit of justice against Rachel. "We need to finalize the DNA tests," Kim instructed. "Dan, if this goes to court, we need irrefutable proof." Dan nodded, a hardened look settling on his face. "We will." Throughout the ordeal, Helen remained my rock. "You're doing the right thing, Liz. We'll come out stronger." One evening, we sat in the living room, the silence thick between us. I finally voiced the question that had been haunting me. "Helen, do you think I'll ever feel normal again?" She wrapped an arm around my shoulders. "Normal might look different, but yes, you will find peace again." Finally, the day came for Chadley to move out. His presence felt ghostly as he packed, casting hollow glances around our home. He tried to speak, but I cut him off. "Save your breath, Chadley. There's nothing you can say that will change this." As he walked out the door, bags in hand, a heavy silence filled the space he left behind. Helen and I sat together, the vast emptiness of the house wrapping around us. "We survived this," Helen said quietly, "and we're stronger for it." "Yeah," I agreed, staring out the window at the departing figure of my former husband. "We are." The road to healing would be long, but I knew I wasn't alone. With Helen and Dan by my side, we faced the future, with a resilience forged in the fires of betrayal, and together we would rebuild, brick by brick, into something unbreakable. The court was oppressive, with its cold walls and judgmental air. Rachel sat at one of the tables, looking fragile and defeated. Her once confident demeanor had vanished, replaced by a haunting vulnerability. I watched her, feeling a peculiar mix of pity and wrath. Kim stood beside me, her confidence a balm to my frayed nerves. "This won't be easy, Liz," she said quietly, "but it's necessary." Dan sat across from us, his posture straight, his face a mask of determination. We exchanged a nod, an unspoken pact of solidarity. Today was the day we held Rachel and Chadley accountable. The judge entered, and the court came to order. Rachel's lawyer rose, attempting a defense soaked in rationalizations. "Your Honor," he began, "my client deeply regrets her actions. She never intended for things to spiral out of control. Her intent was not deceit but desperation." Dan's lawyer, a stern woman named Grace, stood elegantly. "Intent does not negate impact, Your Honor. Rachel Miller knowingly deceived multiple parties, causing emotional and financial damage." Rachel's lawyer continued to plead her case. Rachel was under immense stress. She believed she was providing for her child. Grace interjected, "By defrauding two men and emotionally scarring numerous people, that's hardly justifiable." The judge nodded thoughtfully before turning to Rachel. "Miss Miller, do you have anything to say?" Rachel stood shakily, eyes darting between us. I'm truly sorry. I know I hurt people, but I was scared. I didn't know what else to do." Dan's voice cut through the court with icy precision. "You didn't know what to do. How about telling the truth?" Rachel's eyes filled with tears. "Dan, you have to believe me. I was lost." "Lost?" Dan's anger was palpable. "You were selfish. You used us." Helen squeezed my hand under the table, her presence steadying me. Kim remained focused, her eyes locked on Rachel. Chadley's turn came, as he had to testify regarding his involvement. He walked up to the stand, his once confident demeanor now shattered. "Mr. Monroe, were you aware of Miss Miller's deceit?" Grace asked. Chadley swallowed hard, looking down. "Not fully, no. I was led to believe I was the father of her child." Grace's gaze was unrelenting. "So you claim ignorance?" He nodded slightly. Yes." Dan's face contorted with fury. "You're a liar, Chadley." The judge raised a hand. "Order in the court." Kim took her turn. "Mr. Monroe, you claim you were ignorant, yet you continued to maintain a relationship with Miss Miller. How do you explain that?" Chadley shifted uncomfortably. "I thought I was doing the right thing." "And your wife?" Kim pressed on. "Did she deserve the lies?" He had no answer, his silence speaking louder than any words could. The judge looked at Chadley with disdain. "Mr. Monroe, your actions were not justifiable." As testimonies wrapped up, the judge took a moment before delivering the verdict. "In light of the evidence and the profound deceit involved, I find Rachel Miller guilty of fraud and emotional distress. Custody of the child will be reevaluated. Chadley Monroe's involvement, while not fully complicit, played a crucial role in the damages caused." The courtroom's tension broke slightly with murmurs of approval. Dan looked relieved, though still burdened by the ordeal. Helen gave my hand a final squeeze. "Justice," she whispered. Outside the courtroom, Dan approached me. "We did it, Liz. We stood up for ourselves." I nodded, finally feeling a semblance of closure. "Yes, we did." Chadley walked past us, eyes downcast. He stopped briefly as if to say something, but then continued walking away without a word. Rachel was taken into custody, leaving behind a mess of shattered lives. Despite the relief of justice, a lingering sadness remained. The damage was done, the wounds deep. Helen, Dan, and I walked out together, finding solace in unity. "We'll heal," Helen said, her voice a promise. Dan added, "We have each other now. We'll get through this." As we stepped into the fresh air, I felt a weight lift. The path to recovery was long, but I was no longer walking it alone. The shadows of betrayal had been cast off, replaced by a newfound strength and the support of those who mattered most. The weeks following the court verdict felt like emerging from a long, dark tunnel. Helen, Dan, and I started to piece our lives back together, slowly but surely. One afternoon, Helen and I sat in the living room, sorting through old photo albums. The pictures felt like relics from a different era. "Look at this," she said, holding up a picture of Chadley and me on our wedding day. "You looked so happy." I sighed, taking the photo from her. "It feels like a lifetime ago, but I'm grateful for where we are now." "Same here," Helen replied, her eyes softening. "We have each other, and that's what matters." Just then, my phone rang. It was Kim Hathaway. "Liz, I wanted to update you on the custody hearing for Rachel's child." My heart raced. "What's the news?" "Dan has been granted temporary custody," Kim said. "We need to ensure the child's well-being during this period." "That's great news," I said, relief washing over me. "Dan will be thrilled." After hanging up, I called Dan immediately. He picked up on the first ring. "Hey, Liz, what's up?" I'm calling with good news. You've been granted temporary custody." Dan exhaled deeply, the weight of the past months visible in his voice. "Thank you, Liz. This means a lot." Later that day, Dan came by with his son, little Jake. The boy clutched a toy car, eyes wide with curiosity. "Hey, Jake, this is Aunt Liz," Dan introduced. "Hi, Jake," I said, kneeling to his level. "Want to see a cool toy room?" Jake nodded enthusiastically and disappeared upstairs with Helen, leaving Dan and me alone in the kitchen. "Liz, I can't thank you enough for everything," Dan began, his voice filled with gratitude. "We're in this together," I replied. "How are you holding up?" "Better, knowing Jake's with me," he said, running a hand through his hair. "But there's still a lot to figure out." Helen returned, smiling. "Jake's enjoying the toys. He's got a lot of questions, though," Dan chuckled. "That's Jake for you." As the evening progressed, we shared stories and laughter, a stark contrast to the turmoil we'd faced. It felt like the start of something new, something hopeful. A few days later, a letter arrived in the mail. It was from Chadley. My hands shook slightly as I opened it, bracing myself for whatever it contained. "Liz, I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but I need you to understand how sorry I am. I've lost everything because of my own actions. My wife, my integrity, and the respect of everyone I care about. I don't deserve forgiveness, but I hope you find peace in knowing that I deeply regret all I've done." Chadley, I read the letter twice, processing his words. Helen found me in the kitchen, the letter clenched in my hand. "What's that?" she asked gently. "A letter from Chadley," I said, passing it to her. Helen read it and looked up, her eyes thoughtful. "He's trying to make amends in his own way." "Too little, too late," I replied. "But at least he acknowledges his mistakes." "That's something," Helen agreed. "But we have more important things to focus on now." We spent the evening planning activities for Jake, making sure Dan felt supported in his new role as a single father. The sense of family grew stronger, weaving its threads tighter around us. In the weeks that followed, we established new routines and created new memories. Dan and Jake became regular fixtures at our home, filling the space with laughter and warmth. One night, as we gathered for dinner, Dan raised his glass. "To new beginnings, and to the family we've found in each other." "To us," Helen and I echoed, clinking our glasses together. As I looked around the table, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. We had survived our darkest days and emerged stronger, bonded by resilience and the promise of a brighter future. The scars would fade, but the strength we found in each other would remain forever. $3,500 for electricity? This is insane, Brian. We've been cutting back on everything to save money. Something's definitely wrong, I said, waving the bill in front of Brian's face, my voice trembling with frustration. He sighed, looking up from his phone just long enough to roll his eyes. "You probably left the oven on. I told you not to bake every day." I clenched my fists. "No, I make sure everything's turned off. There's something bigger going on here." I glanced out the kitchen window toward the old tool shed. It had been years since anyone had used it for anything but storage. Brian stood up, lazily stretching his arms. "You're overreacting, Liv. It's just a bill." "Just a bill?" I snapped. "We're wasting money we don't have, Brian. We need to figure this out." He shrugged and walked toward the living room, where the TV was blasting some reality show I never liked. "I'll look into it tomorrow." Anger boiled inside me as I glared at him. "Tomorrow? This can't wait. We need to check now." Brian flopped onto the couch, flipping channels without a care. Fine. I'll look at the breaker box later tonight, okay?" Later. It was always later with him. I stormed out the back door and towards the tool shed, flashlight in hand. The chilly Ohio evening did nothing to cool my temper. Once at the shed, I jiggled the rusty lock open and scanned the interior. Cobwebs hung from the rafters, untouched tools littered the workbench, and the faint hum of electricity caught my ear. I followed the sound, shining the flashlight into dark corners until I found a run of wires leading from the exterior wall. My heart pounded as I traced the wiring back outside. I needed answers, not more questions. By the time I got back inside, Brian was asleep on the couch, typical. I grabbed my coat and headed out to the breaker box next to the house. The wiring setup looked standard at first glance, but something was off. Closer inspection revealed a secondary line trailing from it, leading underground towards the tool shed. "Brian," I hollered, but he didn't stir. Typical again. Frustrated, I stomped back inside and grabbed him by the arm. Come with me, now. What's your problem, Liv? He mumbled, rubbing his eyes. I dragged him outside, pointing at the wiring. Explain this. He stared at it, silent. I don't know. Maybe it's been like that forever. No, Brian, this isn't normal. I want to know what's going on in that tool shed. We trudged back to the shed in silence, the moonlight our only guide. With the flashlight scanning every nook, I felt like a detective on a crime scene. When we reached the shed, I flicked the lights on, and Brian looked genuinely bewildered. Come on, Liv, let's go back inside. We'll call an electrician tomorrow. Brian, stop delaying. We need to figure this out. I insisted, reaching for the plug that connected the tool shed to the main house. As I yanked it out, a sudden uproar of voices spilled into the quiet night. It wasn't just the hum of electricity, it was the TV inside the tool shed. We both froze. Brian's jaw tightened, and I could see panic flickering in his eyes. You've been watching TV in here? While we can't even afford our bills? I was beyond furious. But before Brian could answer, the shed door burst open, and there stood Paula, Brian's mother, her eyes wide with surprise. She marched past us, muttering something about her favorite show. Mom, what are you doing here? Brian asked, bewilderedly. Paula glanced back in a hurry to return to her program. Just catching up on my soaps. What's it to you? As she disappeared back into the shed, Brian avoided my gaze, shuffling his feet in the dirt. Brian, this bill isn't from some oven I left on. It's from your mother hiding out in the shed and watching TV every night. This isn't just carelessness. It's deceit, I said, shaking with anger. For the first time, Brian looked genuinely cornered, and in that moment I knew this was only the beginning. The next morning, the tension in the house was thick enough to cut with a knife. I found Brian in the kitchen, sipping his coffee and staring out the window. His silence was almost worse than the arguments. Brian, we need to talk about this, I said, my voice firm. He looked at me, his eyes tired and distant. What more is there to say, Liv? Mom's been watching TV in the shed. Big deal. I slammed my hand on the counter. It's a huge deal! We're struggling with bills because of this. You knew and didn't say anything. He sighed heavily. I didn't think it was such a problem. She's lonely since Dad passed. I shook my head in disbelief. Lonely or not, this isn't right. We need to discuss how to handle this situation. At that moment, Paula waltzed into the kitchen, her usual brisk self. Good morning, you two. Lovely weather today, isn't it? She said, completely ignoring the tension. I took a deep breath. Paula, we need to talk about the tool shed. Her eyes narrowed slightly. What's there to talk about? I looked at Brian, but he avoided my gaze. The electricity bill is through the roof because you're living in the shed, Paula. We can't afford this. She stiffened, her jaw set. Living in the shed? I'm simply enjoying some peace and quiet. Besides, I have nowhere else to go. Brian cleared his throat. Mom, we were thinking maybe you should move closer. There are a few places nearby we could look at. Paula's eyes widened. What? I can't just up and move. This is my home, too. No, Paula, it's our home. Brian and I took it over after my parents passed. You moving in without asking is affecting us, I said, trying to stay calm. Brian shifted uncomfortably. We need to find a solution, Mom, something that works for all of us. Paula crossed her arms, defiant. Do you expect me to just pack up and leave? Where do you want me to go? A long silence followed. Finally, I spoke. There's a small property down the road. It's close enough so we can help if needed, but gives everyone their space. Paula scoffed. And how am I supposed to afford that? I glanced at Brian, feeling the weight of the situation. We can help you sell your current place, use that money to buy something new nearby. Brian finally looked at his mother. It's the best solution, Mom. You'll have your own place, and Olivia and I can sort out our finances. The room fell silent again. Paula's face flushed with anger, but she didn't argue further. She turned abruptly and left the room, muttering under her breath. Brian and I stood there, the silence heavy between us. This isn't over, Brian. We need proper boundaries here, I said quietly. He nodded, looking deflated. I know, Liv. Let's take it one step at a time. I watched as he walked away, feeling a mixture of relief and dread. This was just the beginning of untangling the mess our lives had become. But for now, it was a step towards reclaiming some control. The days dragged on, and the tension in the house didn't get any better. Brian's work hours grew more erratic, and his late-night absences left me both suspicious and worried. One evening, I found myself pacing the living room, glancing at the clock. It was past midnight when I heard the sound of the bathroom door opening, a sound I'd grown used to but couldn't ignore. I walked up to the bathroom door, noticing the bathroom lights still on and toilet paper running low again. Something wasn't adding up. Curiosity getting the better of me, I stayed by the door, listening. There were strange mutterings inside, almost as if two voices were speaking. I knocked lightly. "Brian?" No answer came. I opened the door a crack, peeking in, but found nothing unusual. The room was empty. Confusion crept in, making me more determined to figure out what was happening under our roof. The following day, I spoke to Brian about his odd work hours. He was sliding on his jacket, ready to leave. "Brian, why are you coming home so late these days? You never used to work these hours." He shrugged, not meeting my eyes. "Just lots of projects at work, Liv. You know how it is." "You don't even tell me when you're coming back. It's not just about work, is it?" I pressed. His face hardened. "You're being paranoid, Liv. I've got enough on my plate without you grilling me." Anger and hurt flashed through me. "Paranoid? Do you think I haven't noticed the extra toilet paper being used? Someone is here when you're not, Brian." He turned away sharply. "You're imagining things. Let's just drop it, okay?" Later that night, I waited again, catching the same mysterious use of the bathroom. Determined to get to the bottom of it, I stayed up, pretending to sleep. At 2 a.m. I heard it, the distant, muffled sounds of conversation. Slowly, I crept out of bed and followed the noise towards the tool shed. Outside, a small glow of light peeked through the shed window. I approached quietly, peering in. There was Brian, not working, but lounging with his mother, Paula Smiths, both engrossed in a late-night TV show. My heart sank as the pieces started to fit together. The next morning, I confronted Paula as she was making breakfast. "Paula, we need to talk about what's going on in the tool shed at night." She looked at me, feigning innocence. "What do you mean, dear?" "You and Brian. You spend late nights in there watching TV while he's supposed to be working. Our bills are soaring because of it," I said, my voice shaking with anger. Paula's eyes flashed with defiance. "So what if we watch TV together? Brian needs a break from you constantly nagging him." Taken aback, I narrowed my eyes. "This isn't just about TV, Paula. It's about you two lying and sneaking around." She smirked, leaning closer. "Maybe if you weren't so uptight, Olivia, Brian wouldn't need an escape." I stood my ground, feeling the fire ignite within me. "This stops now. No more using the tool shed. No more secrets. We can't keep doing this." Paula's expression changed, turning cold. "We'll see about that," she said quietly, but it was enough to know this fight was far from over. The reality of Brian's betrayal and Paula's influence bore down on me. I wasn't paranoid. I was in the middle of a deceitful game, and now I was determined to take control. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table with the dreaded electricity bill in front of me. My hands shook as I dialed the number for the power company. After a few minutes of back and forth, I managed to schedule an inspection for the following day. When the inspector arrived, he was a middle-aged man with a kind face. "Ma'am, I'm here to check on the high electricity usage you've reported," he said, tipping his hat. "Thank you for coming. I really appreciate it. I have no idea what's causing this," I replied, showing him the way to the tool shed. The inspector took out his tools and began examining the outside wall. After a few minutes, he frowned. "There's definitely something odd here. This wiring looks like it's been tampered with." My heart pounded. "What do you mean?" He pointed to a section of the wall where wires ran towards the tool shed. "These wires aren't standard. It looks like something's drawing a lot of power from your main supply." I watched as he continued his inspection, shining a flashlight into the dimly lit interior of the shed. "There's definitely some unusual activity here," he confirmed. I felt a surge of anger and frustration. "Can you help me disconnect it?" "Of course, ma'am, I'll get this taken care of right away," he responded, rolling up his sleeves. Within an hour, the unauthorized wiring was removed, and the shed fell silent, finally disconnected from our power. I thanked the inspector, who reassured me that the situation would be rectified in our next bill cycle. That evening, Brian came home looking annoyed. "Why's the shed dark, Liv?" he asked, tossing his keys on the counter. I crossed my arms, staring him down. "Because I had the power disconnected. The inspector found suspicious wiring." His eyes flashed with anger. You did what? You had no right. No right? We're drowning in bills, Brian. That shed was draining our finances. I shot back. Before he could respond, Paula appeared in the doorway, her face a thundercloud. What's this about the shed losing power? My TV's not working. I took a deep breath, preparing for the storm. The inspector found unauthorized wiring. We can't afford this, Paula. It stops now. Paula's face turned red with fury. You think you can control everything, don't you, Olivia? This is my son's home, too. You can't just decide these things. It's not about control, Paula. It's about our family's well-being. If you won't respect that, I'll take steps to make sure it's enforced, I replied, my voice unwavering. Brian stepped in, raising his hands. Everyone just calm down, all right? We'll figure this out. But Paula wasn't having it. She turned to Brian, eyes blazing. Your wife is ruining everything, Brian. You need to put your foot down. Mom, I've already told you we need to reduce our expenses, Brian said, but his voice lacked conviction. You're just as much a part of this household, she hissed at me, ignoring her son's half-hearted protest. I am, Paula, which is why this can't continue, I responded, my patience wearing thin. Paula scowled. This isn't over, Olivia, not by a long shot. As she stormed out of the room, I felt a mix of relief and dread. I had won this battle, but the war was far from over. And now, deep down, I knew the next steps would be the hardest. The following days were cold and silent. Brian avoided me more than usual, and Paula hardly left her room. In the evening, I decided enough was enough. I marched into the living room where Brian was mindlessly flipping channels. Brian, we need to talk. Now, I said, standing in front of the TV. He sighed and turned off the TV. All right, what is it? We can't keep living like this under a cloud of deceit and stress. We need to address the tool shed situation once and for all. Come with me, I demanded, leading him outside. As we stepped into the chilly night, Brian followed reluctantly. I led him to the tool shed and opened the door. Look at this, Brian. Look at what you've turned our home into. Brian stood at the entrance, his face shadowed. I don't see the big deal, Liv. It's just a shed. Just a shed? This just a shed has cost us thousands of dollars and driven a wedge between us. I barked, barely containing my frustration. Suddenly, I heard the sound of footsteps rushing toward us. Paula, her face twisted in anger, appeared in the doorway. What are you two doing here? Without waiting for Brian to answer, I turned to her. Paula, we've had enough of this secrecy. I know you're using the shed every night. You need to explain yourself. Paula's eyes blazed. You think you're so righteous, Olivia. You don't know the half of it. Brian stepped back, looking trapped between us. Mom, just tell her the truth. Paula sneered. Fine. I've been staying in the shed because Brian promised me I could. He knew how much I missed my own space after your father's death, Olivia. I turned to Brian, my voice ice cold. Is this true, Brian? You knew about this from the start? He hesitated before nodding. I didn't think it'd become such an issue. I felt a surge of betrayal. We've been drowning in bills while you two play house out here. This isn't just about space, Paula. It's about respect, decency, and honesty. Paula took a step closer, her voice low and menacing. Don't preach to me about honesty, Olivia. You've always tried to control everything, making Brian's life a living hell. I'm the one who keeps him sane. My anger flared. Sane? Lies and deceit are what you consider sanity? Without warning, Paula grabbed the unplugged power cord and shoved it toward me. You want honesty? How about you admit you've been driving a wedge between my son and me ever since we moved in? Brian finally spoke, his voice broken. Mom, that's enough. Olivia's right. We need to stop this. What's been happening isn't fair to anyone. Paula looked horrified, as if she couldn't believe her son was siding against her. How dare you, Brian? After everything I've sacrificed for you? Without even looking back, I turned and walked out of the shed. Their voices faded as my feet hit the gravel pathway back to the house. I stormed inside and collapsed on the couch, trembling with the weight of everything. Minutes later, Brian entered, his face pale. Liv, I'm sorry. I looked up at him, my eyes cold. Sorry isn't enough, Brian. This has gone on too long. I need you to make a choice. Either we fix this mess together, or I fix it alone. He swallowed hard, the decision heavy in the air. We'll fix it together, he finally said, but trust wouldn't be easily rebuilt. That night, while the house finally fell silent, I knew this was more than just a strained marriage. It was a battle for control, honesty, and survival, and I wasn't done fighting yet. The house was eerily quiet the next morning. Paula had retreated to her room, and Brian sat at the kitchen table, staring blankly at his coffee. I knew it was time to take matters into my own hands. I started searching the house, room by room, for any equipment or clues that hinted at further deceit. It wasn't long before I found a small, hidden camera tucked behind a picture frame in the living room. My heart raced. This wasn't just about the tool shed. This was about control and surveillance. I marched into the kitchen, holding the camera. "Brian, what is this?" He looked up, his eyes widening with shock. "Liv, I swear, I didn't know about that." I slammed the camera on the table. "More lies, Brian? How much of our life has been recorded?" Paula stormed in, her face flushed with anger. "I did that. I needed to keep an eye on things while you were busy being judgmental and controlling." I turned to her, fury in every word. "Surveillance in my own home? How dare you?" Paula squared her shoulders unfazed. "I did what I had to do to protect my son." I took a step closer, my voice low but sharp. "Protect him or control him? You've overstepped your bounds, Paula. This is unacceptable." Brian stood up, trying to mediate. "Mom, this has gone too far. Olivia's right. You can't spy on us." Paula looked at Brian, betrayal in her eyes. "After everything, you're turning against me?" Brian's voice wavered. "Mom, stop. This isn't helping anyone. We need to stop the lies and deception. It's tearing everything apart." Paula's eyes narrowed. "You think you're better off without me? Do you really believe this woman cares about you?" I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "Brian is my husband, Paula. I care about him more than you know. But this isn't about care anymore. It's about trust, which you've destroyed." The room was thick with tension. Brian took a shaky breath. "Mom, you should go. We need some space to fix things." Paula's face turned crimson. "You're choosing her over me? After everything I've done for you?" Brian's voice steadied. "I'm choosing to save my marriage, Mom. You need to leave." Paula's eyes blazed with hatred as she looked at me. "This isn't over, Olivia. You will regret this." As she stormed out of the house, Brian collapsed into a chair, his hands trembling. "Liv, I'm so sorry. I never wanted it to come to this." I sat across from him, feeling a mixture of relief and sorrow. "Brian, we need to rebuild our trust. I can't keep living like this, doubting everything." He nodded, looking defeated. "I know. I'll do whatever it takes to make things right." That night, I combed through the house, removing every bit of surveillance equipment I could find. Each hidden camera and microphone felt like another betrayal peeled away. Though the storm had cleared some of the air, the damage was deep. Brian and I sat in the living room later, the silence now heavy with the weight of the truth. "Thank you for standing up to her, Brian," I said quietly. He looked at me, eyes filled with remorse. "I should have done it sooner, Liv. I'm sorry for everything." The days ahead would be hard, filled with the struggle to rebuild what had been broken. But for now, the house was ours again, without the shadow of deceit looming over us. We had a long way to go, but the first step had been taken. Together, we would face whatever came next. A week later, Paula stood on our porch, eyes red from crying. It was strange seeing her so vulnerable. "May I come in?" she asked, her voice shaky. I hesitated but nodded. "Fine, but this has to be a constructive conversation, Paula." We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where countless arguments had erupted. Brian joined us, his face tense. Paula took a deep breath. "I've been thinking a lot, and I realized that I overstepped. I didn't mean to cause all this pain. I just didn't want to feel alone." Brian reached out, touching his mother's hand. "Mom, we understand that, but spying on us and sneaking around wasn't the way to handle it." Paula's eyes filled with tears. "I know. I'm sorry, Olivia. I shouldn't have tried to come between you two. Can you forgive me?" I took a moment, letting the weight of her words sink in. "Paula, it's going to take time. Trust isn't something you rebuild overnight. But if you really mean it, we can try." She nodded, wiping her tears. "I mean it. I want things to be better. I want to be part of your lives, in a healthy way." I stood up, feeling the need to take control of the situation. "All right, let's start fresh, but there are conditions. First, no more staying in the tool shed." Paula quickly nodded. "Agreed. And secondly," I continued, "if you need somewhere to stay until you sell your place and find something nearby, you can stay with us. But we need clear boundaries." Brian looked relieved. "That sounds fair, Mom. We need to set things right." Paula smiled faintly. grappling with the emotions that had built up over months. Thank you, both of you. Days turned into weeks, and the house felt more like a home. Paula was staying in the guest room temporarily, and our communication had improved, but the scars of betrayal were still healing. One evening, as we were having dinner, Paula spoke up. I found a small place not too far from here. It's perfect for me. I'll be moving in next week. Brian and I looked at each other, a weight lifting from our shoulders. That's great news, Mom, Brian said, his voice filled with genuine relief. Paula nodded, looking more at peace than I had ever seen her. I hope this helps us move forward. I want to be a positive part of your lives. Later that night, Brian and I sat on the porch, watching the stars. Liv, thank you for giving her another chance, he said quietly. I leaned against him. It's not just about her, Brian. It's about us, too. We need to be strong together. He hugged me tightly. We will be. From now on, things will be different. The process of healing wasn't easy. There were still moments of distrust and lingering resentments, but we were making progress. We talked more openly, shared our worries, and sought to understand each other's perspectives. As the weeks went by, Paula's new place became a sanctuary for her, and our home slowly regained its sense of safety and love. The drama that had overshadowed us so long began to fade, replaced by a newfound respect and understanding. Paula was still part of our lives, but with boundaries that respected everyone's space and needs. The house was filled with laughter and joy again, and we finally felt like a family on the mend, ready to face whatever came our way. In the end, we realized that forgiveness and trust weren't just handouts. They were earned through consistent actions and genuine intentions. And we were all committed to making things right, slowly but surely. Paula's moving day arrived quicker than expected. I watched from the porch as the movers packed the last of her belongings into the truck. It was a strange mix of relief and trepidation. Paula walked over, looking both hopeful and nervous. Thank you for everything, Olivia. I mean it. I nodded. It's a fresh start for all of us, Paula. Let's make the most of it. She hugged Brian tightly and then turned to me, offering a tentative embrace. I accepted it, feeling the tentative warmth. As the truck pulled away, I turned to Brian. We need to change the locks and secure the house properly. He sighed but nodded in agreement. You're right. We need to make sure this never happens again. That weekend, I called a locksmith and replaced all the locks, then moved Brian's belongings into a rental storage unit. He stood by, watching as I packed his things. Liv, do we really need to do this? He asked, pain in his eyes. I paused, looking at him. Brian, we need to separate for a while. We've both been through so much, we need time to heal. He swallowed hard, finally nodding. I understand. Whatever it takes to make things right. The next day, I handed him the keys to the storage unit. You can stay there until you find a place. We'll talk about the rest later. Brian moved his things without protest, leaving the house feeling both empty and free. The separation was hard, but necessary. I needed space to think, to breathe, to figure out what came next. I changed the house's interior, making it my own again. Fresh paint, new furniture arrangements, and the removal of all surveillance equipment helped reclaim my space. It felt like an act of defiance and liberation. A week later, I filed for divorce, demanding alimony. When I handed Brian the papers, he looked broken, yet resigned. I didn't want it to come to this, Liv, he whispered. Neither did I replied, my voice steady, but we need to move forward separately. The court proceedings went smoothly, and soon enough Brian was legally out of my life. It was bittersweet, but I knew it was for the best. Meanwhile, Paula began renovating the tool shed into a livable space. She worked tirelessly, and I saw her determination to make things right. One afternoon, she invited me over to see her progress. As we walked through the tool shed, which now looked more like a cozy studio, Paula spoke softly. This is my new beginning, Olivia. I want to thank you for giving me this chance. I looked around, impressed by her efforts. It's looking great, Paula. I'm glad you found your own space. She smiled, a genuine warmth in her eyes. And thank you for letting us start fresh, too. At home, the quiet evenings were a stark contrast to the chaos that once engulfed our lives. Paula and I gradually built a newfound bond, grounded in mutual respect and understanding. One day, as we sat on the porch enjoying the sunset, she turned to me. You know, Olivia, Watching our favorite shows together has become my favorite part of the day. I chuckled, surprised by how much had changed. Mine too. Who would have thought? We laughed, the tension of the past finally easing away. Despite all the turmoil, we had come out stronger. I found peace in the everyday routines, enjoying the small moments that felt truly mine. The journey from betrayal to liberation had been hard and painful, but in the end, it forged a new chapter filled with promise. Paula and I survived the storm and discovered that sometimes even the most unlikely alliances could lead to genuine harmony. Together, we had built something that neither of us could have foreseen, a challenging yet uniquely rewarding peace. And with that, I knew I was ready to face whatever came next.
The manila envelope sat on my desk like a ticking bomb. Inside was the proposal that could change everything, a chance to acquire Hart Industries, my family's crumbling empire. 10 years of waiting, of building myself up from nothing, had led to this moment. I'm Daphne, and the last time I saw my father, he was tearing up my acceptance letter to Stanford Business School. "We need the money for your brother's startup," he had said, not even looking me in the eye. "Maximus has real potential." My hands trembled as I opened the envelope. The financial statements confirmed what my sources had told me. Hart Industries was hemorrhaging money. My brother's real potential had burned through millions in failed ventures, and now the company was on its knees. "Are you actually going to do this?" Juliet asked, perched on the edge of my desk. She'd been my rock since college, when we were both working 3 jobs to make ends meet. "You mean am I going to save the company that threw me out like yesterday's trash?" I smiled, but there was no humor in it. "Watch me." My phone buzzed. A text from my mother. "Please call me, sweetheart. Your father's been asking about you." I deleted it without responding. The same father who'd told me I was dead to him when I defied his wishes and took out student loans for college. The memory still burned like acid. "The board meeting is next Thursday," Juliet said, scanning through the documents. "We could have the paperwork ready by then." "Perfect." I stood up and walked to the window of our downtown office. 10 floors below, the city hummed with life. "They won't see it coming." "Daphne," Juliet's voice softened. "Are you sure this is about saving the company and not about revenge?" Before I could answer, Eduardo burst into my office. My ex-boyfriend now worked as a financial analyst, and his face was flushed with excitement. "You're not going to believe this," he said, waving his tablet. "Maximus just tanked another deal. Hart Industries' stock is in freefall." I took the tablet, scanning the headlines. My brother had somehow managed to lose a $50 million contract with a single drunken outburst at a client meeting. "Your timing couldn't be better," Eduardo said. "They're desperate for investors." "Then let's not keep them waiting." I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I'd never forgotten. It rang 3 times before a familiar voice answered. "Hart Industries, Esther Bennett speaking." "Hello, Esther. This is Daphne Hart. I'd like to schedule a meeting with the board." The silence on the other end was deafening. Finally, Esther cleared her throat. "Daphne, it's been a long time. 10 years, 2 months, and 15 days. But who's counting?" I kept my voice light. "I represent a group of investors interested in acquiring a significant stake in Hart Industries. I'll need to check with your father." "Of course. Tell him the offer expires in 48 hours. I hung up before she could respond. Juliet whistled low. "You really want to face them again?" I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. My old Stanford acceptance letter, rescued from the trash a decade ago. "They made me who I am today. The least I can do is return the favor." My phone buzzed again. An email this time. Esther had scheduled the board meeting for tomorrow morning. That was faster than expected. Father must be truly desperate. "Well," I said, straightening my jacket, "looks like I'm having a family reunion sooner than planned." Eduardo squeezed my shoulder. "Want me to come with you?" I shook my head. "This is something I need to do alone." That night, I stood in front of my closet, selecting my armor for tomorrow's battle. The black Armani suit I'd bought with my first major consulting fee. The Louboutins that had carried me through countless negotiations. The pearl necklace that had belonged to my grandmother. The only family member who'd believed in me. My phone lit up with another text from my mother. "Your father's not well, Daphne. Please don't do anything rash." I turned off my phone and poured myself a glass of wine. Tomorrow, I would walk into that boardroom not as the scared 19-year-old they'd thrown away, but as the woman who held their fate in her hands. The irony wasn't lost on me. They'd said I'd never amount to anything without their support. Now their only hope of survival rested with the daughter they'd disowned. I raised my glass to my reflection in the window. "Here's to family reunions," I whispered, watching the city lights twinkle below. Tomorrow, the real game would begin. The security guard at Hart Industries did a double-take when I walked through the lobby. "Miss Daphne?" His weathered face broke into a smile. "Is that really you?" "Hello, Frank." I returned his smile, genuine this time. He'd always slipped me candy when I visited Dad's office as a kid. Still keeping watch after all these years? Someone has to. He lowered his voice. "Place isn't what it used to be. Your brother—" He shook his head. The elevator ride to the top floor was a trip through time. Same wood paneling, same subtle vanilla scent, but the energy was different. Gone was the bustling confidence I remembered. The few employees I passed looked stressed, haunted. Juliet was waiting by the boardroom, tablet in hand. "I've been digging deeper into their financials," she whispered. "It's worse than we thought, way worse." "How bad?" "They're 3 months away from bankruptcy. Maximus didn't just lose that last contract. He managed to trigger penalty clauses in 5 others. The lawsuits alone could sink them." Before I could respond, the boardroom door opened. Esther stepped out, perfectly coiffed as always, but with new worry lines around her eyes. "The board is ready for you." She paused, studying my face. "Daphne, your father doesn't know it's you." "Perfect." I straightened my jacket. "Let's keep it that way until I'm ready." The boardroom fell silent as I entered. 12 pairs of eyes followed me to the podium, but I only cared about 2. My father sat at the head of the table, grayer than I remembered, his once commanding presence diminished. Beside him, Maximus slouched in his chair, nursing what looked suspiciously like a hangover. "Good morning," I began, my voice steady. "I represent Aurora Consulting. We've reviewed your situation and are prepared to make an offer." My father's eyes narrowed, trying to place my face. Maximus was too busy texting under the table to notice anything. I clicked to the first slide of my presentation. "Your company's market value has dropped 60% in the past year. Your debt-to-equity ratio is unsustainable, and your current leadership," I looked directly at Maximus, "has destroyed shareholder confidence." "Now wait just a minute," Maximus interrupted, finally looking up. Recognition dawned in his bloodshot eyes. "Holy shit, Daphne?" The room erupted in whispers. My father's face went pale, then red. "What is the meaning of this?" "Business, father. Pure and simple." I advanced to the next slide. "Aurora Consulting offers to acquire a controlling interest in Hart Industries for 40 cents on the dollar. Given your current situation, it's more than generous." "This is absurd," Maximus sputtered. "You can't seriously—" "Your last venture lost $12 million in 6 months. I cut him off. "The one before that, $8 million. Shall I continue?" "Enough." My father's fist hit the table. "This meeting is over. Your shareholders might disagree." I nodded to Juliet, who distributed folders to each board member. "Inside, you'll find detailed documentation of every failed project, every mismanaged contract, and every questionable expense charged to the company in the past 5 years. I smiled at Maximus. "Those Vegas trips weren't really business development, were they?" An elderly board member adjusted his glasses, scanning the documents. "Steve, these numbers, is this accurate?" My father's jaw clenched. "We can explain." "The offer expires in 24 hours, I continued. "After that, this information goes public. Your choice." Maximus stood up so fast his chair toppled backward. "You ungrateful little—" "Sit down," my father snapped. For the first time, I saw real fear in his eyes. "Daphne, can we discuss this privately? My lawyers will be in touch." I gathered my things, heart pounding beneath my calm exterior. "Oh, and Maximus, the Rolex you're wearing, the company paid for that too. I'd hold on to it. You might need to pawn it soon." I walked out with my head high, Juliet right behind me. In the elevator, my hands finally started shaking. "That was incredible," Juliet breathed. "Did you see their faces?" "It's not over yet," I leaned against the wall. They'll fight back. Let them try. We have everything documented. Back in my office, I found a message from my mother. What have you done? Your father's blood pressure. I deleted it without reading further. My phone immediately rang. Esther. The board wants another meeting, she said. Tomorrow morning, and Daphne. There's something you should know. Some documents I found in your father's private files. Letters. To you. Never sent. I gripped the phone tighter. What letters? Come early tomorrow, before the meeting. You need to see these. After hanging up, I stood at my window, watching the sun set behind the city skyline. The triumph I'd expected to feel was tainted by something else. Doubt? Regret? No, I whispered to my reflection. They made their choice 10 years ago. Now it's my turn. But as night fell over the city, I couldn't shake the feeling that tomorrow would bring more than just a business deal to a close. It would force us all to face the ghosts we'd been running from for the past decade. I arrived at Hart Industries an hour before sunrise, the corridors still dark and empty. Esther was waiting in her office, a thick manila folder on her desk. I found these while digitizing your father's old files, she said, pushing the folder toward me. He wrote to you, every month for the first few years after you left. And never sent them? My voice came out sharper than intended. He tried to reach out, in his way. Esther's eyes softened. But pride is a terrible thing, Daphne. Before I could open the folder, hurried footsteps echoed down the hall. Maximus burst in, his expensive suit wrinkled like he'd slept in it. Well, if it isn't the prodigal sister, he sneered. Come to destroy what's left of this family? You've done a fine job of that yourself. I stood, matching his glare. How many millions did you lose last quarter? You think you're so perfect. He stepped closer, alcohol heavy on his breath. While you were off playing entrepreneur, I was here, trying to keep this company alive. Trying to keep it alive, I laughed. You've been bleeding it dry to fund your parties and failed ventures. Enough. Our father's voice boomed from the doorway. He looked older in the harsh morning light, the weight of decades pressing down on his shoulders. Both of you, in my office. Now. We followed him like scolded children. The corner office still looked exactly as I remembered. The same heavy oak desk, the same family photos on the wall. But one was missing. Mine. Sit. Father lowered himself into his chair. Daphne, what do you want? Really want? What's rightfully mine? I met his gaze. The company you never thought I could handle. You abandoned us, Maximus interjected. Abandoned? I turned on him. Father tore up my college acceptance letter because you needed money for another one of your brilliant ideas. What was it that time? The social network for pets? That could have worked if what? If you hadn't spent the development budget on yacht parties? Silence. Father's hand slammed the desk. Maximus, leave us. But Dad, now. Maximus stormed out, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. Father pulled open his desk drawer and took out a bottle of antacids. I've made mistakes, he said quietly, popping 2 tablets. With both of you. Save it. I stood to leave. The board meets in an hour. Make your decision. I already have. He looked up, his eyes tired. I'm stepping down as CEO, and... He swallowed hard. I've already disowned Maximus. The words hit me like a physical blow. What? Last month, after the Singapore deal fell through, he'd been embezzling company funds, hiding losses. Father's voice cracked, just like you said in your presentation. So now you're disowning him too? The irony was almost too much. History repeating itself? No. He pulled out a document. I'm naming you CEO. I stared at him, waiting for the punchline. You can't be serious. The board agrees. You've proven yourself. Built something from nothing. He pushed the paper across the desk. While I was busy protecting Maximus, you were becoming everything I should have helped you be. A knock at the door interrupted us. Esther entered, her face grave. Sir, there's a situation in the lobby. Maximus is making a scene. We rushed downstairs to find Maximus surrounded by security guards, waving a tablet wildly. Look at this, he shouted when he saw us. She's been planning this for years, buying up shares through shell companies, planning stories about our failures. Lower your voice, Father ordered. Or what? You'll disown me too? Maximus laughed hysterically. Too late for that, isn't it, Dad? But hey, at least you have your precious daughter back. Sir, Frank the security guard stepped forward. Should we remove him? Before anyone could respond, Maximus lunged at me. This is all your fault. Father moved with surprising speed, stepping between us. Then he clutched his chest, staggering. Dad? The anger drained from Maximus's face. I caught Father as he slumped, lowering him to the floor. Call an ambulance. I'm fine. Father wheezed, but his face was ashen. Just need a minute. As sirens wailed in the distance, I held my father's hand, watching his labored breathing. Maximus stood frozen, all his bravado gone. The letters, Father whispered. Did Esther? Yes, I said, but I haven't read them yet. He squeezed my hand weakly. Read them, please. The paramedics rushed in, pushing us aside. As they loaded Father onto a stretcher, I caught Maximus's eye. For a moment, we weren't rivals or enemies, just two scared kids watching their father being wheeled away. This isn't how I wanted it, I said softly. Maximus just shook his head and followed the stretcher out, leaving me alone in the lobby of the empire I'd fought so hard to claim. The manila folder with Father's letters felt heavy in my bag, waiting to reveal whatever truths or lies he'd written all those years ago. The hospital waiting room smelled of antiseptic and stale coffee. I sat alone, the manila folder of letters unopened in my lap. Maximus paced near the vending machines, while our mother sat across the room, deliberately avoiding my gaze. Family of Steve? A doctor emerged, her face carefully neutral. We gathered around her. He's stable, she said. The stress triggered a mild heart attack. He'll need rest, but he should make a full recovery. Can we see him? Mom asked. One at a time. He's asking for Daphne. Mom's sharp intake of breath cut like a knife. Maximus kicked a chair. Father lay small and pale against the white hospital sheets, monitors beeping steadily beside him. The letters, he said as soon as I entered. Have you read them? I shook my head. Read the first one, out loud. My hands trembled as I opened the folder, pulling out the earliest dated letter. Dear Daphne, I began. Today you left for college. The house feels empty without your laugh. I told myself I was doing the right thing, protecting the family business. But watching you walk away with just one suitcase, I've never felt like more of a failure as a father. I stopped, my throat tight. Keep reading, he whispered. Maximus lost the investment again. He reminds me so much of myself at his age, reckless, arrogant. I kept throwing money at him, hoping he'd learn, hoping he'd grow. Instead, I lost the one child who truly understood what it means to build something from nothing. You worked 3 jobs in high school, saved every penny. I was too proud to see what was right in front of me. There are more, Father said. One for every month you were gone. A knock interrupted us. Esther stood in the doorway, clutching a laptop. I'm sorry, but this can't wait. The board is meeting in an hour. They're voting on the acquisition. Go, Father said. Take the letters with you. Read them when you're ready. In the elevator back to Hard Industries, I opened another letter at random. Dear Daphne, saw your name in the business journal today. Your consulting firm helped turn around that struggling tech startup. Pride doesn't begin to describe what I felt. Shame comes closer. I drafted an email to congratulate you, but what right do I have? I threw away that right the day I chose Maximus's failures over your success. Those are private. Maximus's voice made me jump. I hadn't heard him enter the elevator. You knew about these? Found them in his study last year. He leaned against the wall, suddenly looking very tired. He writes them when he's drunk, usually after I've screwed up something else. The elevator doors opened to chaos. Board members huddled in groups, whispering urgently. Esther rushed toward us. The vote's been moved up, she said. They're starting now. Wait, Maximus grabbed my arm. Before you go in there, there's something you should know about the Singapore deal. I already know you embezzled. No, he cut me off. It's worse. I didn't just lose the money. I sold classified company data to our competitors. If that gets out, it's not just bankruptcy we're facing. It's criminal charges. I stared at him. Why are you telling me this? Because, he swallowed hard, Dad doesn't know, and it would kill him if he found out. Literally, after today. The boardroom fell silent as we entered. I took my place at the podium, the acquisition papers heavy in my hands. "Before we vote," I said, "I have a new proposal." Murmurs rippled through the room as I laid out my plan. A restructuring instead of an acquisition. I would take over as CEO, but with conditions. A full audit of all accounts, new compliance protocols, and a chance for redemption. This company was built on second chances, I concluded, thinking of the letters in my bag. Maybe it's time we remembered that. The vote was unanimous. As board members filed out, Maximus approached me. "Why?" he asked. "You could have destroyed us all. Read this." I handed him one of Father's letters. "He never gave up on you, even when he should have." "And you?" His voice was small. "Have you given up on me?" Before I could answer, my phone buzzed. A text from Eduardo. "Just got word about Singapore. Documents leaked. Press will have it by morning." I looked at Maximus, who was reading Father's letter with tears in his eyes. "No," I said finally. "I haven't given up. But starting tomorrow, we do things my way. No more secrets, no more shortcuts. The Singapore deal. We'll handle it, together. But Maximus?" I met his eyes. "This is your last chance. Don't make me regret it." He nodded slowly, handing back the letter. As he left, I pulled out another one from the folder. There were still so many to read, so many years of unspoken words to unpack. But for now, there was work to do. A company to save, a family to rebuild. One letter at a time. The morning headlines hit like a tsunami. Hart Industries scandal. Corporate espionage allegations surface. My phone hadn't stopped ringing since dawn. "The SEC wants a statement," Juliet announced, bursting into my office. "And there's a crowd of reporters in the lobby." "Get legal on the line," I said, scanning through another one of Father's letters. This one was from 3 years ago, after my first major business success. "And find Maximus, now." About that, Juliet shifted uncomfortably. "He's not answering his phone, but Eduardo's here, says it's urgent." Eduardo walked in, looking like he hadn't slept. "The Singapore documents? They're worse than we thought. Maximus didn't just sell data, he sold prototype designs, military contract stuff." Jesus Christ. I dropped the letter I was holding. "How bad?" "Federal investigation bad. The Department of Defense is involved now." A knock at the door interrupted us. My mother stood there, looking smaller than I remembered. "Your father's asking for you both," she said quietly. "He's seen the news. At the hospital, Father sat up in bed, newspapers spread across his lap. Maximus was already there, staring out the window. Sit down, both of you." Father's voice was stronger today. "Maximus, explain yourself." "I can't." Maximus turned, his face haggard. "I screwed up, again. But this time I can't fix it." "No," Father agreed. "You can't, but Daphne might be able to." I looked up sharply. "What?" "The military contracts," Father said. "They were your specialty in consulting, weren't they? Crisis management for defense contractors? You followed my career?" He gestured to the letters scattered across his hospital bed. "Every step of it." "The prototype designs," Eduardo cut in. I hadn't even noticed him follow us in. "If we can prove they were preliminary, never approved for development." "We'd still face penalties," I said, "but not federal charges." "I have the original drafts," Maximus said suddenly, "in a storage unit. Everything showing they were rejected concepts, never meant for production." Father closed his eyes. "Get them, now." As Maximus rushed out, Father picked up one of his letters. "This one's from last month. Would you read it?" I took the paper with trembling hands. "Dear Daphne, today I watched you on CNBC talking about corporate restructuring. You were brilliant, confident, everything I failed to see when you were younger. I keep a photo of you in my desk drawer from your high school graduation. Sometimes I take it out and try to understand how I could have been so blind." "Stop," Father's voice cracked. "The rest doesn't matter now. What matters is fixing this. Together." Eduardo cleared his throat. "The press is still waiting for a statement." "Then let's give them one." I stood up. "But first, I need to know everything. No more secrets." Over the next hour, Father and Eduardo laid out the full scope of the Singapore disaster. Maximus returned with boxes of documents, proof that the leaked designs had been rejected early in development. It's damage control, I said finally. But we can work with this. You can work with this, Father corrected. You're CEO now, remember? About that? I pulled out the last letter I'd read, dated just 6 months ago. You wrote that you were proud of how I built something from nothing, that you wished you'd had my business sense at my age. Every word true. Then trust me to fix this, but we do it my way. Complete transparency, full cooperation with investigators, and Maximus. I turned to my brother. You come clean about everything. They'll crucify me, he whispered. No, I said. They'll see a company taking responsibility, making things right. The next few hours were a blur of lawyers, press statements, and regulatory filings. By sunset, I stood before a crowd of reporters in the Hart Industries lobby. Today, we discovered a breach of trust, I began. Not just with our partners, but with our values. As the new CEO of Hart Industries, I'm here to take full responsibility. Later that night, I returned to Father's hospital room. He was asleep, letters scattered across his bed like fallen leaves. Each one a year of regret, of words unsaid. Maximus sat in the corner, reading through them. I never knew, he said softly, how much he worried about both of us. Neither did I. I picked up a letter from the pile. But we know now. Can we really fix this? I thought about the press conference, the meetings with regulators scheduled for tomorrow, the mountain of work ahead. Not alone, I said finally, but maybe together. He nodded, understanding what I wasn't saying. The road ahead would be hard. Trust would need to be rebuilt, not just with the public, but with each other. My phone buzzed. Juliet sending the first round of press coverage. The headlines were brutal, but beneath them, I saw something else. A chance to rewrite our story. Not as the vengeful daughter or the prodigal son, but as a family finally learning to read each other's letters. The Department of Defense wants a full audit, Juliet announced, dropping a stack of papers on my desk. They're giving us 48 hours to comply. Better than an immediate shutdown, I said, rubbing my temples. 3 days had passed since the Singapore scandal broke, and I'd barely left the office. A soft knock interrupted us. Mom stood in the doorway, holding a casserole dish. You need to eat, she said, both of you. The smell of her signature lasagna filled the office as she set up an impromptu dinner on my conference table. For a moment, I was 16 again, studying late while she made sure I didn't skip meals. Your father's being released tomorrow, she said, serving generous portions. He wants to have a family dinner, everyone together. Mom, I started. Please, Daphne. She touched my hand. There's something you all need to know. Before I could respond, Maximus burst in, waving a folder. Found it. The original Singapore contract. Look at section 7.3. The designs were explicitly marked as rejected concepts. He stopped short at the sight of Mom. The last time we'd all been in a room together, he'd been trying to punch me in the lobby. Sit, Mom commanded. Eat. We ate in awkward silence until Juliet's phone buzzed. The auditors are here early, she said. I should go, I nodded. We'll handle this. As soon as she left, Mom put down her fork. Your father's stepping down permanently. We know, Maximus said. The board meeting? No, she cut him off. You don't understand. The heart attack? It wasn't his first. He's been sick for months. The doctors say the stress. The lasagna turned to ash in my mouth. Why didn't you tell us? He wouldn't let me. Said he needed to fix things first. She pulled out an envelope. He wrote this last night. Wanted you both to read it together. My hands shook as I opened it. Dear Daphne and Maximus, by the time you read this, you'll know about my condition. The doctors give me 6 months, maybe a year. Not enough time to make up for my failures as a father, but maybe enough to help you both succeed where I couldn't. Stop, Maximus choked out. I can't. Keep reading, Mom insisted. Maximus, I enabled your worst instincts, threw money at problems instead of teaching you to solve them. Daphne, I dismissed your potential because it didn't fit my narrow vision. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking you both to learn from my mistakes. The company needs both of you, Daphne's discipline and Maximus's creativity. Together you might build something greater than I ever could. The letter blurred as tears filled my eyes. A commotion outside drew our attention. Ms. Hart, Esther rushed in. The auditors found something in the old files, about the Singapore deal. The next hour was a whirlwind of revelations. The auditors had uncovered emails showing the leaked designs had been deliberately marked as viable by a senior executive, someone trying to sabotage both Maximus and the company. It was Robert from the board, Esther explained. He's been working with our competitors for months. Maximus was just a convenient scapegoat. Get me every email, I ordered, every document, and call Eduardo. We need to revise our press statement. Already on it, Maximus said, surprising me. He'd pulled out his laptop and was typing furiously. I've been tracking Robert's communications for weeks. Didn't understand what I was seeing until now. Mom watched us work with a small smile. Your father should see this. See what? I asked. His children, finally working together. The next morning, we gathered in Father's hospital room. He sat up straighter as I laid out what we'd found. Robert? He shook his head. I trusted him for 20 years. He's being arrested as we speak, Eduardo reported from the doorway. The FBI's involved now. And the company? Father asked. Stock's already recovering, Maximus said. Once we release the evidence. No, I interrupted. No more hiding behind press releases. We hold a press conference, all of us. Show them we're united. Father reached for his letters. There's one more you should read first. The last one I wrote. This letter was different. Dated yesterday, the handwriting shaky but determined. My dearest children, watching you work together these past days has been the greatest gift a dying man could ask for. Daphne, your strength has become our foundation. Maximus, your insight, when properly focused, sees what others miss. Together, you've already proven wiser than I ever was. We're not done yet, Maximus said quietly. No, I agreed. We're just getting started. Father smiled, reaching for both our hands. Outside his room, I could hear reporters gathering, auditors combing through files, the wheels of justice and business turning. But in here, for just a moment, we were simply a family, broken, healing, but finally reading from the same page. The press conference room buzzed with tension. Cameras clicked and reporters whispered as our family took the stage together. Father in a wheelchair, Mom standing behind him, Maximus and I flanking them like guards. Thank you all for coming, I began, gripping the podium. Today, we're here to set the record straight about Hart Industries, about family, and about redemption. A reporter's hand shot up. Ms. Hart, how do you respond to allegations that this is a power grab, using your brother's mistakes to seize control? Before I could answer, Maximus stepped forward. My sister didn't seize anything. I nearly destroyed this company through my recklessness. But the recent allegations about the Singapore deal... Mr. Hart, another reporter interrupted. Sources say you sold classified designs to competitors. No, I cut in. He was framed. We have evidence that board member Robert Thompson orchestrated the entire scandal. The room erupted. Cameras flashed as Eduardo distributed packets of evidence, emails, transactions, proof of Thompson's betrayal. The FBI has arrested Mr. Thompson, Father announced, his voice weaker than I'd ever heard it. But that's not why we're here today. He tried to stand, but his legs buckled. Maximus caught him before he fell. Dad, don't, I whispered, but he waved me off. My children, he continued, gripping the podium for support, have shown me what true leadership looks like, not in their successes, but in how they've faced failure. Together. Suddenly, his face went pale. He clutched his chest, slumping forward. Dad, Maximus and I moved simultaneously, catching him as he collapsed. The room exploded into chaos. Reporters jumped to their feet, cameras flashing wildly. Mom screamed for an ambulance. Stay with us, I pleaded, holding Father's hand as paramedics rushed in. Please, we still have so much to fix. His eyes fluttered open briefly. The letters, he whispered. Last page. The hospital waiting room felt smaller this time. Maximus paced while I flipped through Father's letters, searching for the final page he'd mentioned. Found it, I said finally. It was different from the others. Not a letter, but a document. What is it? Maximus asked, peering over my shoulder. His will. He changed it yesterday. My hands trembled as I read. He's splitting everything equally between us. The company, the assets, everything. Co-CEOs? Maximus sank into a chair. That's impossible. We'd kill each other. Maybe that's the point. I looked at the last line Father had written. Together or not at all. The doctor emerged, her face grim. The stress was too much. He's stable but in a coma. The next 24 hours are critical. Mom broke down, sobbing into her hands. Maximus punched the wall, leaving a dent. "Stop it!" I snapped. "This isn't helping." "Then what do we do?" he demanded. "The press is having a field day. Thompson's lawyers are spinning everything. The company's hanging by a thread, and now this?" "We do what he asked." I held up the will. "We work together." "How? We can barely be in the same room without fighting." "Then we learn." I thrust Father's letters at him. "Read these. Really read them. He spent 10 years writing about both of us, seeing what we couldn't see in ourselves." Esther burst into the waiting room. "The board's calling an emergency meeting. They're voting to sell the company." Maximus and I exchanged looks. For the first time, I saw in his eyes the same determination I felt. "Not happening," we said simultaneously. The boardroom was packed when we arrived. Board members fell silent as we entered. The prodigal son and the vengeful daughter, now standing united. "Before you vote," I announced, "you should know Father's final decision." Maximus stepped forward. "We're taking control, together, as co-CEOs." "Impossible," someone shouted. "You'll destroy what's left of the company." "No," I said firmly. "We'll save it, because we finally understand what Father knew all along. We're stronger together than apart." "Prove it," a board member challenged. Maximus pulled out his laptop. "I've spent the last 24 hours tracking every deal Thompson sabotaged. Daphne's team has already drafted recovery plans for each one. And I've secured bridge financing," I added, "based on Maximus's analysis of our untapped markets." We presented for an hour, tag teaming like we'd been doing it for years instead of days. When we finished, the board sat in stunned silence. My phone buzzed, a text from Mom. "Come quick, he's awake." We raced back to the hospital, arriving just as Father opened his eyes. "Did you read it?" he whispered. "The last page?" "Yes," we answered together. "And?" Maximus took his hand. "We're ready to try it your way." "Together," I added, taking his other hand. Father smiled weakly. "Then my work here is done." Outside the hospital room, reporters gathered again, hungry for the next chapter in our family saga. But for now, we sat with our father, 3 broken pieces finally fitting together, ready to write a new story. Together. The autumn breeze rustled through the courtyard as workers installed the new Heart Industries sign. Father sat in his wheelchair beside me, wrapped in a warm blanket, watching the company's rebranding take shape. "The logo looks different," he observed. "Maximus designed it," I said. "Combined the old with the new, like us." Inside, the office hummed with renewed energy. Employees who'd once walked with slumped shoulders now moved with purpose. The fear of collapse had been replaced by something else. Hope. "Ms. Hart," Esther hurried over. "The Singapore clients are here for the settlement meeting." "Both Ms. Harts," a familiar voice corrected. Mom stepped out of the elevator, elegant in her new role as board chairwoman. "Where's Maximus?" "Right here." My brother emerged from his office, straightening his tie. Gone were the designer labels and flashy accessories. He'd finally learned that substance mattered more than style. The settlement meeting was tense but productive. Our legal team presented evidence of Thompson's manipulation, while Maximus walked everyone through the reconstructed timeline of events. "We're not asking you to forget what happened," I told the Singapore representatives. "We're asking for a chance to make it right." "And why should we trust you now?" their lead negotiator asked. "Because we're not the same company," Maximus answered. "Or the same people." Father wheeled himself forward. "My children have done in weeks what I couldn't do in decades. They've built something stronger than pride." The Singapore team exchanged looks. Finally, their CEO nodded. "We accept the settlement terms." After they left, Eduardo rushed in with breaking news. "Thompson took a plea deal. He's naming names, other executives involved in corporate espionage." "Good," Maximus said. "Let everything come to light." Father coughed, drawing our attention. His health had improved, but time remained our enemy. "I need to show you something," he said, "in my old office." We followed him to the corner office I'd once been forbidden to enter. He wheeled to the wall of family photos and pressed a hidden panel. The wall slid open, revealing a small safe. "The combination," he said, is both your birthdays. Inside lay a single envelope, yellowed with age. I wrote this the day you left, Daphne. It was supposed to be my resignation letter. I opened it carefully. Dear board members, I have failed not just as a CEO, but as a father. In choosing between my children, I have destroyed what matters most. I hereby resign. Why didn't you send it? Maximus asked. Fear, Father admitted. The same fear that kept me from reaching out to Daphne all those years. The same fear that made me enable your mistakes, Maximus. And now? I asked. He smiled. Now I'm not afraid anymore, because I see what you've built together. A commotion outside drew us to the window. The new sign was complete, illuminating the darkening sky. Hart Industries, building tomorrow together. There's one more thing, Mom said, pulling out a familiar manila folder. We found more letters, not from your father, from each other. Maximus paled. You kept those? She handed me a stack of papers, letters my brother had written but never sent during our years apart. I gave her my own collection, emails drafted but never sent to Maximus. Read them, she said. Both of you. We sat in Father's office as the sun set, reading each other's unspoken words. Maximus's letters revealed guilt, jealousy, and eventually pride in my success. Mine showed anger giving way to concern, then hope for his redemption. Why didn't we just talk? Maximus asked, his voice rough. Because we're hearts, I laughed through tears. We don't do anything the easy way. Father wheeled between us. But you're doing it now. That's what matters. A knock interrupted us. Juliet stood in the doorway with Eduardo. Sorry, but you need to see this. They led us to the lobby where employees had gathered around the television. The news showed Thompson being led into court, then cut to footage of Hart Industries' recovery. In a remarkable turnaround, the reporter said, Hart Industries has become a model of corporate rehabilitation. Led by siblings Daphne and Maximus Hart, the company has... Turn it off, I said. We've got work to do. Father grabbed my hand. You already did it. You both did. Looking around the lobby, at our employees' proud faces, at Mom's tears of joy, at Maximus standing tall beside me, I finally understood. This wasn't just about saving a company. It was about saving a family. So, Maximus said, ready to build tomorrow together? I thought about all the letters, all the words we'd left unspoken, all the time we'd lost. But looking at Father's peaceful smile, I knew we'd found something more valuable than revenge or redemption. We'd found our way home. Together, I agreed, taking his offered hand. That's the only way forward.
You can't just leave me for her, Stephen. Isabella's voice echoed through the grand marble lobby. He smiled ruefully, holding the hand of his new bride, Donna. My heart pounded like a drum. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My fiancé of 3 years, Stephen Anderson, was standing in the middle of an exquisite wedding ceremony, but he wasn't waiting for me. He was with her, Donna. I took a step forward, my heels clicking loudly on the marble floor. Stephen, what is going on here? My voice trembled, a mix of anger and pain. Stephen looked at me, the corner of his mouth curling into a smug grin. Funny seeing you here, Isabella? Funny? You think this is funny? My voice rose, drawing the attention of the guests. You're marrying her, using the money we saved together for our future, for this. Donna looked at him, confusion shadowing her eyes. Stephen, is she telling the truth? Stephen sighed, pulling his hand away from her grip. Yes, Donna, it's true. Isabella and I were engaged, but she was never exciting enough. I felt like the ground had crumbled beneath me. Exciting enough? Is that why you stole from me? To fund this sham of a wedding? He shrugged, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Yes, Isabella, your savings made this dream possible. My blood boiled. You're a monster, Stephen. The crowd started murmuring, growing louder as people pieced together the betrayal. I could see the scandalous headlines already forming in their minds. Donna's shock turned into rage. You used her money for our wedding? How could you do that to me? Stephen turned to her, a forced calm in his voice. Donna, listen. No, Stephen, I interrupted. You're not talking your way out of this one. Both of you deserve to know the truth. He's been playing us, Donna. Donna's face crumpled, and she stepped back, her eyes never leaving Stephen. Is this all true? Have you been lying to me? He tried to take her hand again, but she slapped it away. "Don't touch me." I looked around, meeting the eyes of everyone in the room. "I will make you regret this, Stephen." With a final glance at the chaos behind me, I turned on my heel and walked out of the grand lobby. Each step away from Stephen and Donna solidified my resolve. I was done being the quiet, naive fiancé. The betrayal fueled something fierce within me. Layla, my best friend and lawyer, picked me up from the hotel. "Are you all right, Isabella?" Her concern was evident, but she knew my answer. "I'm not okay, Layla, but I will be. We're going to make them pay." Her eyes sparkled with determination. "What do you plan to do?" I clasped my hands tightly in my lap, taking a deep breath. "We need to gather evidence. We need everything on Stephen's betrayal, and then we take him down." "Isabella, that's going to be hard? Are you sure about this?" I nodded. "More than ever. He didn't just betray my trust, he used me, my dreams, my savings." Layla's expression hardened. "All right, let's get to work. We'll need everything he's done, every lie, every theft." I looked out the window, the city lights blending into a blur. "He won't know what hit him." Layla nodded. "We'll make sure of that." As we drove away from the scene of ultimate betrayal, I knew one thing for sure. Stephen had made the biggest mistake of his life, and I was going to make sure he paid for every single moment of pain he had caused me. The sun dipped below the horizon as Layla and I settled into a corner booth at our favorite cafe. She opened her laptop, ready to document everything. "Start from the beginning, Isabella," she said. "How did you meet Stephen?" I took a sip of my coffee, gathering my thoughts. It was a business meeting. I was new at the firm, trying not to draw attention to myself. Stephen was the project lead, confident, charming. He made it all look effortless. Layla typed, nodding for me to continue. "He saw me struggling with some papers and offered his help. It was a small gesture, but it meant a lot at the time. We started talking. He was always so engaging. It felt like he drew me out of my shell." Layla glanced up. "Was he always manipulative?" I shook my head. "Not obviously. He knew how to hide it well. There were signs, though, small things that felt off. I remember the first time he snapped at me." Her fingers paused over the keys. "What happened?" "He had promised he'd be at my friend's birthday. He didn't show up. When I confronted him, he turned it around, said I was being clingy, that he had important work commitments." Layla's brows furrowed. "Work commitments?" "Yes, but I found out later he was at a bar with some friends. I brushed it off at the time, thinking maybe I was overreacting. He was always so convincing." "He sounds like a textbook manipulator. Charm when he needs it, cruelty when it benefits him." "Exactly. There were good times, too. He made grand gestures, like that trip to the lake. He planned everything, made me feel special." Layla's frown deepened. "But that was his trick, right? Lure you back in after pushing you away?" "Yes," I admitted, feeling a bitter taste in my mouth. Looking back, I see the pattern, but at the time I was blinded by love, or what I thought was love. And then the engagement. He proposed during a weekend getaway. He was so romantic. Candlelit dinner, fat rose petals. I thought it was genuine. Little did I know, he was planning our future with my money. Layla's eyes narrowed. "When did you start putting money away with him?" "Right after we got engaged. He said he wanted to build a life together, and part of that was financial security. I trusted him, so I agreed." "And he kept pushing the wedding plans, right?" she asked, confirming what she already knew. "Yes. Every time I asked about setting a date, he had an excuse. Work deadlines, family issues. I thought he wanted it to be perfect. Now I see he was stalling." While planning his wedding with Donna, Layla added, anger evident in her voice. "Exactly. He played me for a fool." Layla leaned back, closing her laptop. "We need evidence. Emails, messages, anything that shows his deceit." I nodded, resolute. "I'll gather everything. He left traces. He got careless, thinking I wouldn't notice. We'll need to be thorough, Isabella. This has to be airtight." "I know," I said, determination burning inside me. "I won't let him get away with this." As we left the cafe, I made a silent vow. Stephen's charm had lured me in, but his lies had unleashed my fury. He would face the consequences of every deceitful act. Stephen's engagement party was the first time I felt completely out of place. His friends were loud, boisterous, like they owned the world. I nursed my drink, trying to find comfort in the corner of the room. "Isn't Isabella too straight-laced for you, Stephen?" One of his friends sneered, a tall man with an arrogant smirk. Stephen laughed, glancing over at me. She's perfect, he said, but his eyes flickered toward his phone, which buzzed incessantly all night. That was Stephen, always presenting one face to the world, another to those closest to him. I should have noticed the signs then, his constant need to check his phone, the smirk he couldn't quite hide when he thought I wasn't looking. But I wanted so badly to believe him. Later that night, as the party wound down, Stephen pulled me aside, his face serious. "Isabella, I'm sorry about my friends. They can be jerks sometimes." I forced a smile. "It's fine. I just wish you wouldn't get so distracted." He frowned, slipping his phone into his pocket. "I promise, I'm here with you. Let's make tonight about us." But the promises always fizzled. He had a knack for saying what I needed to hear, only to revert to his old ways once my guard was down. Months passed, and our engagement became a cycle of highs and lows. Expensive dinners and spontaneous weekend getaways kept me hooked, overshadowing the doubts that crept in during his frequent business trips and late-night absences. One night, I confronted him as he was getting ready to leave. "Why are you always out so late?" "Business, Isabella," he replied coldly, adjusting his tie. "Don't be so paranoid." "It's not paranoia when it's happening so often," I insisted, blocking his way. He sighed, annoyed. "Look, I have big deals in the works. It can't be helped. You knew my job came with long hours, but you never explain anything. It's like there's this whole part of your life I'm not allowed to see." His expression hardened. "I'm doing this for us, for our future. Do you understand that?" I stepped back, feeling the familiar sting of his barbed words. "I just want to feel like I'm part of your life too, Stephen." "You are, but you have to trust me." He kissed my forehead, a gesture that used to comfort me but now felt condescending. Those kisses, those empty assurances, they were what kept me hoping, kept me trying. Until the night of our dream wedding shattered everything. After I saw him with Donna, the full weight of his deceit crushed me. All those moments of doubt now made sense. Stephen had used me, played me. The anger simmered beneath my skin, fueling my resolve. Sitting in Layla's office later that week, I handed over a stack of documents. These are emails, text messages, everything that felt off to me. Layla skimmed through them, her brow furrowing. "This is good, Isabella, but we need more. Bank statements, any financial records showing the transfers. We need to create a clear trail." "I'll get them," I said firmly. "I won't stop until I have everything." Layla nodded, determination matching my own. "We're going to take him down." Every step I took now had a purpose. Stephen had thought he could use me and walk away unscathed. He was dead wrong. I was going to expose every lie, every manipulation. He would regret underestimating me. The game was on, and I was ready to play. I watched as Stephen became increasingly distant. It started with him coming home late, always muttering something about a client meeting running over or a sudden work emergency. At first, I believed him, or at least wanted to. One evening I couldn't ignore it any longer. He came in at midnight, reeking of alcohol. I stood in the hallway, my arms crossed. "Where have you been, Stephen?" "Out with clients," he slurred, attempting to brush past me. "At a bar, I assume?" I shot back, not moving. "Isabella, don't start. I'm tired," he said coldly, heading for the bedroom. "Stephen, this is getting out of hand. You're hardly here anymore. We don't talk." "I don't see you. We talk," he snapped, turning to face me. "You just choose to focus on the negative." "Negative? You're never home, and when you are, you're in another world," I said, feeling my frustration bubble over. His face twisted in annoyance. "I'm working hard for our future. Why can't you see that?" "Stop hiding behind that excuse," I shouted. "Is there someone else, Stephen?" The room fell silent. For a moment I thought I saw something like guilt flash across his face, but it was gone before I could be sure. "That's ridiculous," he said, his voice icy. "I'm dedicated to us." I stared at him, feeling helpless. "Then act like it." Weeks went by and the nights grew colder, not just outside but between us. Stephen's absences became more frequent, his explanations more vague. One night, after he had left yet again claiming a business emergency, I sat on the couch with my laptop. I decided to dig deeper. It took some time, but eventually I stumbled upon his email account. As I read through his messages, a bitter taste filled my mouth. There they were. Dozens of emails between Stephen and Dee, discussing their secret project, their future together. It all clicked. Donna wasn't just some fling. She was a full-scale replacement. I printed everything, feeling my chest tighten with each page. When he came back later that night, I was ready. My hands trembled, but I squared my shoulders and waited. "Isabella, awake?" he called casually, nearly making me snap. "In the living room," I replied evenly. He sauntered in, then froze, noticing the papers spread out on the coffee table. "What's this?" "Your emails with Donna," I said, my voice steady despite my trembling fingers. "I know everything." His face transformed. Gone was the casual facade, replaced by a flicker of fear. "Isabella, I can explain." "Explain? You've been planning a life with another woman while stringing me along." I pointed at the emails. "Your late nights, your business meetings, they were all lies." He took a step toward me, but I held up my hand. "Don't. Just don't." His eyes darkened. "You're blowing this out of proportion." "Am I? Tell me, Stephen, what's your idea of proportion? Using my savings to fund your wedding with her?" He looked like he was about to argue, but then he laughed, a cold, hollow sound. "You were always so gullible, Isabella. You didn't see it coming, did you?" My chest tightened. "No, I didn't. But I see it now and I'm done. You're going to pay for this, Stephen." Walking away from him, I felt a strange mix of relief and rage. He had shown his true colors, and there was no going back. With every step into our shared apartment, I knew I was moving towards uncovering every layer of his deceit. The end of our engagement would be just the beginning of his downfall. The tip came through an anonymous text message. "Luxury hotel, Saturday at noon. You need to see this." I stared at my phone, my curiosity piqued and my suspicions raging. I needed to find out what Stephen was hiding. On Saturday, I dressed carefully, trying to look composed, despite the turmoil inside me. The hotel lobby was grand, filled with fresh flowers and the murmur of guests. I saw the sign for the wedding reception and followed the arrows. My heart pounded harder with each step. Finally, I stepped into the ballroom. There at the altar was Stephen in a tuxedo, Donna by his side in a white gown. The world seemed to tilt. "Dearly beloved," the officiant began, but his words drowned in the rushing sound in my ears. I forced my legs to move, walking purposefully down the aisle. "Stop!" My voice cut through the ceremony, turning heads. Stephen's eyes widened as he saw me, a flash of panic crossing his face. Donna looked confused, glancing between me and Stephen. "What is this?" I demanded. "How could you do this to me?" Stephen's face twisted into a sneer. "Isabella, you shouldn't be here." "But I am," I replied, my voice shaking with fury, "and I see now exactly what you are." "Stephen, what's going on?" Donna asked, her voice trembling. "Tell her, Stephen," I challenged. "Tell her how you used my savings for this sham of a wedding." Donna's face crumpled, shock giving way to understanding. "Is that true? Did you use her money for this?" Stephen rolled his eyes, his mask slipping to reveal the callous man beneath. "Yes, it's true. I used her money, because she was never exciting enough." The guests gasped, whispers sweeping through the room. I took a deep breath, my rage fierce and burning. "You think you can just walk away from this?" Stephen smirked. "I can and I will. What are you going to do about it?" "You'll see," I said, my voice cold. "Everyone here will know what you did." Stephen turned to his stunned bride. "Donna, don't listen to her. She's trying to sabotage us." But Donna's face had turned cold. "Get away from me, Stephen. You lied to me." I stepped closer, my eyes never leaving Stephen's. "You played both of us, but you won't get away with it." As security moved to escort me out, I turned to the crowd, raising my voice. "This man is a liar and a thief. He used me, and he'll use anyone to get what he wants." I was led out of the hotel, but I didn't care. The seed was planted. Stephen's perfect world was crumbling around him. On my way out, I sent a quick text to Layla. "I need everything we have on Stephen. Now." Back in Layla's office, we reviewed every piece of evidence again. "We're taking this public, and we're going to make sure everyone knows," I said. Layla nodded, sliding a folder across the table. "This is more than enough. He's not going to walk away clean." As we finalized our plans, I felt a sense of clarity and resolve. Stephen's betrayal had broken something inside me, but it had also forged something stronger. He thought he could dismiss me, but he was wrong. I would be the storm that tore down his carefully crafted facade, and I would make sure he felt every moment of it. Stephen had no idea I had been recording our conversation. When I confronted him at home, I made sure my phone was hidden but capturing everything. "Your savings made this dream possible," he sneered, his words dripping with arrogance. This recording would be my weapon. Layla uploaded the file to her computer. "This is perfect, Isabella. He's admitting everything." I sank into the chair, feeling a mix of relief and anticipation. What now? Layla tapped away on her keyboard, bringing up her contacts. "First, we alert the media, local news, social media influencers. We need to ensure maximum exposure. Then, we file a lawsuit." My eyes locked onto hers, my resolve steeling. Let's do it. The next day, I walked into Layla's office to find her already bustling with activity. "I've got a reporter from the local news station interested," she said, looking up from her desk. "And I contacted a few social media influencers who love a good scandal." "Great," I replied, settling into the seat across from her desk. "We need to make sure this hits him where it hurts." That evening, we posted the recording online, tagging Stephen's workplace and everyone relevant in his social circle. Within minutes, the post began to spread like wildfire. The following morning, Stephen burst into my office at work, his face red with anger. "What the hell did you do, Isabella?" I stood up, meeting his glare head-on. "I exposed you. People deserve to know what kind of person you really are." "You think you can ruin me?" He spat, stepping closer. "You'll regret this." I held my ground. "No, Stephen, you'll regret this. You used me, you betrayed me, and now the world knows." As security escorted him out, Greg, a supportive coworker, approached me. "You all right?" I nodded, taking a deep breath. "I will be." That night, Layla and I watched as the news station aired the story. Footage of Stephen's confession played, followed by my account of our relationship and his betrayal. It was surreal watching my life unfold on screen. "He'll face consequences now," Layla said, squeezing my hand. "This is just the beginning." The following weeks were a whirlwind. Stephen's face was plastered everywhere, his reputation slowly crumbling. He was suspended from his job pending an investigation, and Donna publicly filed for an annulment. One afternoon, I received a call from a reporter wanting to do an in-depth interview. Sitting down with them, I reiterated my story, making sure every detail of Stephen's deceit was highlighted. "Do you feel justice has been served?" the reporter asked. "Not yet," I said firmly. "There's more to do." I continued meeting with Layla, collecting more evidence and planning the legal side of things. "We need to file a suit for emotional damages and theft," Layla explained. "We can also go after him for fraud." I nodded, determined. "Let's get everything we can." As we filed the lawsuit, the weight of my decision hit me. This fight wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming my life, my dignity. Stephen thought he could use and discard me, but he underestimated my resolve. Back at home, I received a call from my parents. "You've always been strong, Isabella. We're proud of you," my dad said, his voice filled with warmth. "Thanks, Dad. I couldn't have done this without you and Mom." "Remember," Mom chimed in, "this is just a chapter in your life. You have many more to write." As I hung up, I felt a sense of closure. Stephen's actions had sparked a fire in me, one that wouldn't burn out anytime soon. This battle might be far from over, but I was ready to face whatever came next. My fight for justice was just beginning. The high-profile event was buzzing with energy. Every influential person in the city seemed to be there, and so was Stephen. I spotted him across the room, mingling and laughing, still playing the charming role he perfected over the years. Layla squeezed my arm. "Ready?" "More than ever," I replied, clutching a small, portable speaker in my other hand. We moved to the center of the ballroom, taking deep breaths. I raised my voice, making it clear and forceful. "Excuse me, everyone. May I have your attention?" The room fell silent as people turned to look at us. Stephen's smile froze, his eyes narrowing as he recognized me. "What is she doing here?" someone murmured. "I have something to share," I continued, my voice unwavering. I lifted the speaker and hit play. Stephen's recorded confession echoed through the room. "Your savings made this dream possible," his voice sneered. Gasps filled the air, followed by whispers and shocked glances. I watched as Stephen's face turned from pale to an angry red. "Everyone, witness the man who used his fiancée's savings for another wedding," I announced, my voice cutting through the stunned silence. Stephen stormed towards me, eyes blazing. "What do you think you're doing, Isabella?" "Showing everyone who you really are," I retorted, meeting his gaze without flinching. "You think you can manipulate people, ruin lives, and walk away? Not anymore." Donna, who had been standing off to the side, approached us, her face ashen. "Isabella, is this true? Did he really use your money?" I nodded. "Every word of it. He never intended to marry me. It was all a lie. The crowd started to murmur again, louder this time. Stephen tried to grab my arm, but Layla stepped in, blocking him. "Don't you dare," she warned. "You have no right to do this," Stephen shouted. "I have every right," I snapped back. "You deceived me. You took everything. Now everyone knows." Donna turned to Stephen, tears streaming down her face. "I trusted you. How could you do this?" Stephen's face twisted in anger and desperation. "It wasn't like that, Donna. She's distorting the truth." "Am I?" I asked, holding up the phone, still playing his confession. "You admitted it yourself." The room watched as Donna shook her head, stepping back from Stephen. "I can't believe I was so blind." Stephen looked around, realizing the tide had turned against him. His composed facade shattered. "You'll regret this," he hissed, his voice low and threatening. "Enough with the threats, Stephen," I replied coldly. "Your true colors are plain for everyone to see." A security guard approached, and at Layla's nod, he escorted Stephen out, who continued to rage and curse as he was led away. The crowd began to disperse, people still whispering and throwing curious looks my way. Layla turned to me, her eyes full of pride. "You did it, Isabella." "You exposed him." I nodded, feeling a strange mix of exhaustion and relief. "We did it." Over the next few weeks, the fallout was swift. Stephen lost his job and faced public disgrace. Donna went through with the annulment, and Layla pursued the legal action against him. The digital evidence we had collected, emails, bank transfers, and the recorded confession, painted a clear picture of his deceit. One evening, as I was sorting through some old photos, I received a text from Layla. "We're winning. His attempts to countersue have been dismissed." I smiled, a real smile, for the first time in what felt like forever. Revenge had never been my goal. Justice was. And now, with each passing day, it felt like I was reclaiming my life, piece by piece. I met with my parents for dinner. As I walked in, my father wrapped me in a warm hug. "You always had the strength, Isabella. We're proud of you." "Thanks, Dad. I have a long way to go, but I'm getting there." "We're here for you always," Mom added, her smile comforting. As we sat down to eat, I looked around at the faces of my family. For the first time in a long while, I felt at peace. This chapter of my life was closing, but a new one was beginning. And this time, I was the one writing it. The courtroom was tense as we waited for the verdict. Stephen sat a few rows away, his expression a mix of anger and defeat. My heart pounded, but I kept my composure, glancing at Layla for reassurance. The judge returned, and everyone rose. In the matter of Isabella Hart versus Stephen Anderson, the court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Isabella Hart. Mr. Anderson is hereby ordered to repay the stolen funds and compensate for emotional damages. A wave of relief washed over me as the judge continued, detailing the legal requirements Stephen would face. I glanced at him and saw his face turn ghostly pale. After the session, Stephen approached me in the hallway, his lawyer trailing behind. "Isabella, please, can we talk?" I shook my head. "There's nothing left to say, Stephen." He looked desperate. "I didn't mean for things to go this far. I'm sorry." "Sorry doesn't fix what you did," I replied, my voice steady. "You made your choices. Now you face the consequences." With that, I turned and walked away, feeling a weight lifting from my shoulders. Layla joined me, her eyes sparkling with triumph. "We did it, Isabella. Justice is served." "Thank you, Layla. I couldn't have done this without you." "Yes, you could have," she said with a smile, "but I'm glad I could help." The weeks following the trial brought a sense of closure. Stephen struggled to find work, his reputation in ruins. Donna quietly left town, seeking a fresh start away from the scandal. I spent more time with my parents, drawing strength from their unwavering support. One evening, over dinner, my dad looked at me with pride. "Isabella, you've come a long way. How are you feeling?" "I feel free," I admitted, smiling. "It's like a new chapter is beginning." "That's the spirit," Mom chimed in. "You've got the whole world ahead of you." Back at work, my colleagues treated me with newfound respect. Greg, who had always been a silent supporter, approached me one afternoon. "Hey, Isabella, I was wondering if you'd like to grab a coffee sometime. Just as friends, of course." A genuine smile spread across my face. "I'd like that, Greg. Thank you." As we sipped our coffees, Greg shared his own experiences of overcoming challenges, and I found comfort in knowing that I wasn't alone. "You're stronger than you think," he said, his eyes full of warmth. "Thank you, Greg. That means a lot." My days became brighter, filled with new possibilities and a renewed sense of purpose. I decided to focus on my career, setting new goals and aspirations. The lessons I had learned from Stephen's betrayal became a source of strength, reminding me of my resilience. One day, Layla called with exciting news. "Isabella, there's a job opening in my firm. It's a prestigious position, and I think you'd be perfect for it." "Really? That's amazing," I replied, feeling a surge of excitement. "I'll send over my application right away." "You've got this," she said with confidence. "I believe in you." As I clicked send on my application, I felt a sense of accomplishment. Stephen's betrayal had tested me, but it had also made me stronger. Now I was ready to embrace new opportunities and build a future on my terms. Standing by the window, I looked out at the city lights, feeling a sense of peace. The storm had passed, and a new dawn was breaking. With my past behind me and new horizons ahead, I knew that I was ready to face whatever came next. The journey had been tough, but I had emerged stronger, wiser, and ready to reclaim my life. The future was mine, and I was determined to make every moment count. I stared at Blake in disbelief as he knelt before me, holding out a sparkling diamond ring. "Harper, will you make me the happiest man alive and marry me?" My heart raced, and I felt a rush of excitement mixed with nervousness. This was all happening so fast, but I couldn't deny the love I felt for him. "Blake, this is so sudden." "Yes, I will." He slipped the ring onto my finger and we embraced, garnering applause from the other patrons of the high-end restaurant. In that moment, everything seemed perfect, like a fairy tale come true. Little did I know, the fairy tale was about to take a dark turn. A few days later, Blake and I were having dinner at his parents' lavish estate, where I would officially meet his family. I had heard stories about their wealth and influence, and I couldn't help but feel a twinge of anxiety. As we sat down at the table, Blake's mother, Carolyn, fixed me with a scrutinizing gaze. "Harper, what's your highest level of education?" I shifted uncomfortably in my seat. I graduated from a community college while my mom raised me alone." Carolyn's eyes narrowed, and she turned to my mother, Jennifer, who had accompanied me. "You raised her alone?" Jennifer nodded, her posture rigid. "Yes, I'm a single mother. I've worked hard to provide for Harper." Carolyn scoffed, and before I could react, she picked up her glass of wine and flung it at Jennifer, drenching her in the deep red liquid. "Mother, what are you doing?" Blake exclaimed, but Carolyn silenced him with a wave of her hand. "This engagement is over," she declared, her voice dripping with contempt. "Harper is not a suitable match for our family." I sat there, frozen in shock, as Carolyn and Blake's father, David, berated us, their words cutting deeper than any knife ever could. As Jennifer and I made our way out, I overheard Blake's voice from another room. "Compared to Harper, Melanie is perfect. Educated, well-connected, it's a no-brainer." My heart shattered into a million pieces, and a burning rage ignited within me. Without thinking, Jennifer and I burst back into the room, startling Blake and his family. "You'll regret this, Blake," I spat, my voice trembling with fury. "I'll make sure of it." Jennifer's eyes burned with determination as she added, "We'll ruin your precious family's company if it's the last thing we do." With those words, we stormed out, leaving behind a stunned silence. The fairy tale had ended, and a new chapter of revenge was about to begin. The next few days were a blur of anger and humiliation. I tried my best to maintain a professional demeanor at work, but every time I saw Blake, a wave of resentment washed over me. "Harper, can we just act professional?" he had the audacity to ask one day as we passed each other in the hallway. I fixed him with a withering glare. "Don't talk to me. Ever." His face fell, but I couldn't bring myself to care. He had shattered my heart, and his family had treated my mother and me like garbage. Meanwhile, Jennifer was on a warpath, determined to bring down the Turners at any cost. "We need everything on them," she told me one evening over the phone. "Financial records, emails, anything that could be used as leverage." I nodded, though she couldn't see me. They'll never see it coming. With a newfound sense of purpose, I started paying closer attention to Blake's behavior at work. I noticed him taking frequent calls in hushed tones, disappearing for hours at a time without explanation. And then there was Melanie, the woman he had chosen over me. She would strut around the office like she owned the place, always throwing me condescending looks whenever our paths crossed. One day, as I was working late, I overheard Melanie on the phone in the break room. "Don't worry, baby. I'll take care of everything. Harper is no threat to us." My blood boiled at the smug tone in her voice. She had no idea what was coming. Over the next few weeks, Jennifer and I meticulously gathered evidence of Blake's misdeeds. Financial statements that didn't add up, emails discussing shady business deals, even recordings of him bad-mouthing his own family. "They're going to pay for what they did to us," Jennifer said, her voice laced with determination. I nodded, my jaw clenched. The Turners had made a grave mistake in underestimating us. Their perfect little world was about to come crashing down around them. With our plan set in motion, Jennifer and I decided to pay one final visit to the Turners' estate under the guise of returning Blake's engagement ring. As we pulled up to the imposing gates, my heart was pounding with a mixture of anticipation and dread. "Are you ready for this?" Jennifer asked, her expression steely. I took a deep breath and nodded. More than ready. We rang the bell, and a few moments later, the gates swung open, allowing us to proceed up the winding driveway. As we approached the front door, it opened to reveal none other than Melanie, her perfectly coiffed hair and designer outfit a stark contrast to our more modest attire. "Well, well, if it isn't the scorned ex-fiancée and her mom," she sneered, looking us up and down with disdain. Before I could respond, Carolyn's shrill voice echoed from inside. "Who is it, Melanie?" "Just some unwanted guests," Melanie called back, her lips curling into a smug smile. Carolyn appeared in the doorway, her nose turned up in distaste. "What are you doing here?" I held up the ring box, my hand trembling slightly. "I'm here to return the ring," Carolyn scoffed. "Get out of my house." But I stood my ground, feeling a surge of confidence coursing through me. "Not until you hear what I have to say." Melanie rolled her eyes. This should be good. Ignoring her jab, I pulled out my phone and hit play on the damning recordings we had gathered. Blake's voice filled the air, discussing shady business deals and misappropriation of company funds. Carolyn's face drained of color as she listened, her eyes widening in horror. "Blake, what have you done?" As if on cue, Blake himself appeared, his expression turning to one of panic when he saw us. "Harper? Mom, what's going on?" "You tell us, son." David's gruff voice came from behind him. "Care to explain these recordings?" Blake's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, but no words came out. Melanie, however, found her voice. "Blake, you assured me everything was above board. You lied to me." The tension in the air was palpable as the Turners turned on each other, accusations and insults flying back and forth. In the chaos, Jennifer leaned over and whispered in my ear, "Their empire is crumbling, just as we planned." I allowed myself a small smile, feeling a sense of vindication wash over me. The Turners had brought this upon themselves, and now they were reaping what they had sown. "Good riddance," I muttered, watching as Melanie stormed off, her perfect facade finally shattered. After the explosive confrontation at the Turners' estate, I expected Blake to slink away in shame, tail between his legs. Instead, he had the audacity to show up at the office the next day, acting as if nothing had happened. As I sat at my desk, trying to focus on work, I could feel his eyes boring into the back of my head. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. "What do you want, Blake?" I hissed, whirling around to face him. He held up his hands in a placating gesture. "Harper, I know things got heated the other night, but can't we just move past it, for the sake of professionalism?" I let out a humorless laugh. "Professionalism? After everything you and your family put me through?" Blake's expression hardened. "That's ancient history. Melanie and I have moved on, and you should too." My blood boiled at the mention of his new fiancée, the woman he had chosen over me, only for her to turn on him when the truth came out. "Don't you dare say her name in front of me," I spat. "And don't think for a second that this is over. Your family's downfall is just beginning." Blake's eyes flashed with something akin to fear, but he quickly masked it with a smirk. "Whatever helps you sleep at night, Harper." With that, he turned and sauntered away, leaving me seething. The nerve of that man, acting like he was untouchable. Over the next few weeks, Blake continued to pester me, sending me emails and leaving voicemails, all in the name of professionalism. Each time I deleted or ignored them, my hatred for him growing stronger by the day. Meanwhile, Jennifer and I were hard at work, gathering even more evidence of the Turners' misdeeds. financial records, incriminating emails, you name it. We were building an airtight case against them, one that would ensure their empire crumbled to dust. And then there was Melanie. The woman who had once looked down her nose at me now seemed lost and adrift, her perfect life in tatters. Part of me felt a twinge of satisfaction at seeing her brought low, but mostly I just pitied her. She had been just as much a pawn in Blake's games as I had. As the weeks turned to months, the walls continued to close in on the Turners. Their once mighty company was hemorrhaging money and clients, and rumors of their shady dealings were beginning to circulate in the media. Through it all, I remained focused and professional, letting my work speak for itself. And whenever Blake tried to engage me, I shut him down with a withering glare or a curt "leave me alone." The time for words was over. Now, it was time for action. And Jennifer and I were ready to deliver the final blow that would bring the Turners to their knees. As the weeks passed, my determination to bring down the Turners only grew stronger. Jennifer and I spent countless hours poring over the evidence we'd gathered, looking for any weak spots in their armor. "We need to hit them where it hurts the most," Jennifer said one evening, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Their reputation, their finances, everything." I nodded in agreement. "They'll regret the day they ever crossed us." Meanwhile, at the office, I couldn't help but notice Blake's behavior becoming increasingly erratic. He would disappear for hours at a time, only to return looking disheveled and stressed. I couldn't help but wonder what shady dealings he was up to now. One day, as I was leaving for the evening, I caught sight of Blake in a heated conversation with a man I didn't recognize. Their voices were hushed, but the tension was palpable. "You have to take care of this, Blake," the man hissed. "Your family's reputation is on the line." Blake ran a hand through his hair, his expression one of pure desperation. I know. Just give me a little more time." As they parted ways, Blake caught sight of me and froze, his eyes wide like a deer in headlights. Before he could say anything, I turned on my heel and walked away, my mind whirling with questions. What kind of trouble was Blake in now? And more importantly, how could I use it to my advantage? Over the next few days, I made it a point to keep a closer eye on Blake's comings and goings. I noticed him taking more and more clandestine meetings, always with different, shady-looking characters. It was clear that whatever he was involved in, it was deep and far-reaching, and if my hunch was correct, it could be the key to finally bringing down the entire Turner empire. As I shared my observations with Jennifer, her eyes lit up with a fierce determination. "We need to get to the bottom of this," she said, her voice steely, "no matter what it takes." And so we hatched a plan. We would tail Blake, document his every move, and gather as much evidence as possible about his secret dealings. It was a risky move, but one we were both willing to take. The first few times we followed him, it was relatively uneventful. Blake would meet with his associates, exchange hushed words and cryptic documents, and then go on his way. But then, one night, everything changed. We had been tailing Blake for hours, watching as he bounced from one seedy location to the next. Finally, he pulled up to a rundown warehouse on the outskirts of town. "This is it," Jennifer whispered, her grip tightening on the steering wheel. "I can feel it." We watched with bated breath as Blake slipped inside, disappearing into the shadows. After a few tense minutes, we decided to follow, our hearts pounding in our chests. What we saw inside that warehouse would change everything. After months of meticulous planning and gathering evidence, the time had finally come to confront Blake and his family head-on. With a deep breath, I steeled my nerves and rang the doorbell of the Turner estate, Jennifer by my side. The door swung open, and there stood Melanie, perfectly coiffed as always. Her eyes widened in surprise when she saw us. Well, if it isn't the scorned ex and her mother," she sneered. "Come to beg for scraps." Before I could respond, Carolyn's shrill voice echoed from inside. "Who is it, Melanie?" "Just some unwanted guests," Melanie called back, her lips curling into a smug smile. Carolyn appeared in the doorway, her face twisting into a scowl. "You two have some nerve showing up here." I held up the ring box, my hand steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "I'm here to return the ring, Carolyn, and to settle some unfinished business." Carolyn scoffed. "Get out of my house before I call the authorities." But I stood my ground, feeling a surge of confidence wash over me. Not until you hear what I have to say. Melanie rolled her eyes. This should be good. Ignoring her jab, I pulled out my phone and hit play on the damning recordings we had gathered. Blake's voice filled the air, discussing shady business deals and misappropriation of company funds. Carolyn's face drained of color as she listened, her eyes widening in horror. "Blake, what have you done?" As if on cue, Blake himself appeared, his expression turning to one of panic when he saw us. "Harper? Mom, what's going on?" "You tell us, son," David's gruff voice came from behind him. "Care to explain these recordings?" Blake opened and closed his mouth like a fish out of water, but no words came out. Melanie, however, found her voice. "Blake, you assured me everything was above board. You lied to me." The tension in the air was palpable as the Turners turned on each other, accusations and insults flying back and forth. In the chaos, Jennifer leaned over and whispered in my ear, "Their empire is crumbling, just as we planned." I allowed myself a small, satisfied smile. The Turners had brought this upon themselves, and now they were reaping what they had sown. As Melanie stormed off in a huff, her perfect facade finally shattered, Blake rounded on me, his eyes blazing with fury. "You did this," he spat. "You and your mother have gone too far." I met his gaze unflinchingly. "No, Blake. You brought this on yourself with your lies and deceit. It's time to face the consequences." With those words, I turned and walked away, leaving the Turners to their imploding empire. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. The fallout from our explosive confrontation at the Turner estate was swift and severe. Blake's family was in complete disarray, their carefully constructed facade crumbling around them. As the news of Blake's shady dealings and misuse of company funds hit the media, the Turners found themselves under intense scrutiny from the public and the authorities alike. Carolyn and David were forced to make a humiliating public statement, apologizing for their son's misdeeds and vowing to cooperate with any investigations. But even as their empire teetered on the brink of collapse, the Turners remained defiant, lashing out at anyone and everyone they could. Blake, in particular, seemed to have lost all sense of reason. "This is all your fault," he raged at me one day, as we crossed paths in the office. "You and your mother have destroyed everything." I met his gaze coolly, unfazed by his outburst. "We only exposed the truth, Blake. Your own actions did the rest." He let out a bitter laugh. "Truth? You have no idea what the truth is, Harper." Before I could respond, he leaned in close, his eyes burning with a mix of anger and desperation. "You think you've won, but this is far from over. I'll make sure you and your mother pay for what you've done." His words sent a chill down my spine, but I refused to show any fear. "Is that a threat, Blake?" He stepped back, a cruel smile twisting his lips. "Take it however you want, Harper. Just know that no one crosses me and gets away with it." With that ominous warning, he turned and stormed off, leaving me to wonder just how far he was willing to go to exact his revenge. In the days that followed, the Turner family's dirty laundry continued to be aired for all to see. It seemed like every day brought a new bombshell revelation, from shady business deals to illicit affairs and everything in between. And through it all, Blake remained defiant, refusing to take responsibility for his actions. Instead, he doubled down on his threats against me and my mother, making it clear that he wouldn't rest until he saw us suffer. But as the walls closed in on the Turners, a surprising ally emerged, Melanie, Blake's former fiancée. Scorned and betrayed by the man she thought she knew, she had no qualms about spilling every sordid detail of their relationship and Blake's misdeeds. "He lied to me from the start," she revealed in a tell-all interview. "I was just another pawn in his game, a means to an end." As Melanie's revelations hit the airwaves, the public's outrage towards Blake and his family reached a fever pitch. Protests erupted outside the Turner estate, with people demanding justice and accountability. And through it all, I remained steadfast, my resolve only strengthened by the knowledge that we were on the right side of this battle. Blake and his family had brought this reckoning upon themselves, and now they were facing the consequences of their actions. As the dust settled and the Turners' once mighty empire lay in ruins, I couldn't help but feel a sense of vindication. We had fought for what was right, and in the end, the truth had prevailed. In the aftermath of the Turner family scandal, the fallout was swift and severe. Blake's father, David, was forced to resign from his position as CEO of the company, and Carolyn found herself ostracized from the social circles she once ruled with an iron fist. As for Blake himself, he faced a slew of legal troubles, with investigations into his shady business dealings and misuse of company funds. It was a humiliating downfall for someone who had once seemed so untouchable. Through it all, I couldn't help but feel a sense of vindication. After months of meticulous planning and execution, our revenge had been achieved. The Turners' once mighty empire was in shambles, their reputation in tatters. They got what they deserved, Jennifer said to me one evening, a satisfied smile on her face. Their empire is crumbling, and it's all thanks to us. I nodded, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. We had fought for justice, and in the end, the truth had prevailed. In the weeks that followed, I found myself adjusting to a new normal. The company I worked for had undergone a major restructuring in the wake of the Turner scandal, and I was transferred to a different department, far away from the toxic environment that had once surrounded Blake and his family. It was a fresh start, and one that I embraced wholeheartedly. Gone were the days of walking on eggshells and dealing with Blake's constant harassment. Instead, I was able to focus on my work and thrive in a supportive, positive environment. As for my personal life, I found myself taking a step back from the dating scene. After the betrayal I had experienced with Blake, I was wary of opening my heart too quickly. But deep down, I knew that one day, when the time was right, I would find someone who truly deserved my love and trust. In the meantime, I poured my energy into my career and my relationship with my mother. Jennifer and I had grown even closer through our shared ordeal, and we found strength in each other's support. "You're an inspiration, Harper," she told me one day, her eyes shining with pride. "You never gave up, even when the odds were stacked against us." I smiled, feeling a warmth bloom in my chest. "I couldn't have done it without you, Mom. We're a team, always." As the months passed, the Turner family scandal faded from the headlines, but the lessons I had learned would stay with me forever. I had seen firsthand the consequences of greed, deceit, and entitlement, and I vowed never to let those toxic traits take root in my own life. Instead, I focused on cultivating patience, discernment, and a strong moral compass. I knew that true happiness and fulfillment could only come from living an authentic, honest life, something that the Turners had clearly failed to grasp. And as for the future, well, the possibilities were endless. With the weight of revenge lifted from my shoulders, I felt free to pursue new opportunities and embrace whatever challenges life had in store. One thing was certain: I would never again let anyone underestimate me or treat me like a second-class citizen. The Turners had learned that lesson the hard way, and I was all the stronger for it. "Kylie, I'm leaving you. I filed for divorce today. I love someone else." The words hit me like a slap across the face, disorienting me for a moment as I struggled to process what Todd had just said. "What? You filed for divorce without telling me?" I asked in disbelief, my voice shaking. How could he do this? Todd shrugged nonchalantly. "I've moved out, and don't worry about the house, it's all taken care of. You're just not the wife I need anymore." My heart pounded in my chest, my anger and hurt swirling inside me like a raging storm. After 25 years of marriage, he was casually discarding me like yesterday's trash. I opened my mouth to respond, but the words caught in my throat. Todd's expression hardened. "Look, I'm not going to argue about this. It's done. I've met someone new, someone who actually understands me." His callous dismissal stung, but it also ignited a fire within me. I wasn't going to let him off that easily. "Who is she?" I demanded, my voice steadier now. He hesitated for a moment, then sighed. "Her name is Emily Reed. She's younger, more ambitious, and she actually supports my dreams." I recoiled as if he had physically struck me. Emily Reed. The name meant nothing to me, but the implication was clear. He had been having an affair behind my back, and now he was throwing away our marriage for this younger woman. Anger coursed through my veins, overriding the initial shock. "How long has this been going on?" I asked through gritted teeth. Todd shrugged again, his indifference only fueling my fury. "A while." "Look, I'm not going to stand here and justify myself to you. It's over, Kylie. Accept it and move on." With those words, he turned and walked away, leaving me standing in the middle of our living room, numb with disbelief and rage. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to lash out at the injustice of it all, but I found myself paralyzed, unable to do anything but watch as the life I had known crumbled around me. As the front door slammed shut behind Todd, a single thought crystallized in my mind. I would not let him get away with this. I would find out the truth, and I would make him pay for what he had done to me, to us. The war had just begun. After Todd left, I sank onto the couch, my mind racing. How had I not seen this coming? As the initial shock wore off, memories began to surface. The late nights at the office, the unexplained absences, the distance that had grown between us over the years. Had it all been leading up to this moment? I thought back to my dreams of becoming an architect, how I had put them on hold to start a family with Todd. At the time, it had seemed like the right choice, but now I couldn't help but wonder if I had sacrificed too much. The sound of my phone ringing jolted me out of my thoughts. It was Leslie, my best friend from college. We had drifted apart over the years, but she had always been there for me when I needed her. "Kylie, is everything okay? You sound upset." I took a deep breath, trying to steady my voice. "It's Todd. He filed for divorce. Says he's been having an affair with some younger woman named Emily Reed." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Oh, Kylie, I'm so sorry. That must be devastating." I felt tears welling up in my eyes. I never saw it coming. How could I have been so blind? "Don't blame yourself," Leslie said firmly. "This is on him, not you. He made the choice to betray your trust and throw away your marriage." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "You're right, and I'm not going to let him get away with it." "What do you mean?" "I'm going to find out everything I can about this Emily Reed, and I'm going to make sure Todd pays for what he's done," I said, my voice hardening with resolve. Leslie hesitated. "Kylie, I understand you're hurting, but revenge isn't going to make you feel better in the long run." "Maybe not," I admitted, "but I can't just sit back and let him walk all over me. I need to do something." There was a pause, and then Leslie sighed. "All right, just be careful, okay? Don't do anything reckless." "I won't," I promised, even though I wasn't entirely sure what I was capable of at that moment. After hanging up with Leslie, I sat for a long time, staring at the wall, replaying the events of the day in my mind. Todd's words echoed in my head, each one a knife twisting in my heart. As the anger and hurt swirled inside me, I made a decision. I was going to find out everything I could about this Emily Reed, and I was going to make sure Todd paid for what he had done to me, to our family. It was time to take action. Over the next few days, I became consumed by the need to uncover the truth about Todd's affair. I scoured his email and bank records, looking for any clues that might lead me to this mysterious Emily Reed. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of searching, I struck gold. A charge for a fancy restaurant downtown, one that Todd and I had never been to. I recognized the name and address immediately. It had to be where he was meeting her. That night, I waited outside the restaurant, my heart pounding in my chest. I wasn't sure what I was going to do or say when I saw them together, but I knew I needed to confront them, to see it with my own eyes. Sure enough, just after 8 o'clock, Todd's car pulled up, and he emerged, looking sharp in a suit and tie. A few moments later, a younger woman joined him, her arm linked through his. My stomach twisted into knots as I realized this must be Emily Reed. They disappeared inside the restaurant, and I waited, my anger and hurt simmering just below the surface. After what felt like an eternity, they finally emerged, laughing and holding hands. I steeled myself and stepped out from the shadows. "So this is her, huh? The woman you threw away our marriage for?" Todd froze, his expression shifting from shock to anger in an instant. "Kylie, what the hell are you doing here? I think the better question is, what are you doing with her?" I spat, gesturing towards Emily, who looked utterly bewildered. "Kylie, this isn't what it looks like," Todd began, but I cut him off. "Save it, Todd. I know exactly what this is. You've been having an affair, and now you're leaving me for this girl." Emily's eyes widened, and she looked at Todd in disbelief. "Is that true? You're married?" Todd sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "It's complicated, Emily. Kylie and we've been over for a long time." "Don't feed her those lies," I snarled. "We were fine until you decided to throw it all away for a pretty face." Emily shook her head, her expression a mixture of hurt and anger. "You know what? I don't want any part of this. She turned and stormed off, leaving Todd and me alone on the sidewalk. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Todd rounded on me, his eyes blazing with fury. Are you happy now, Kylie? You've ruined everything as usual. I stepped closer, my hands balled into fists at my sides. Don't you dare try to pin this on me, Todd. You're the one who betrayed our vows, our family. You're the one who threw it all away for a fling with some younger woman. Todd scoffed, shaking his head. You just don't get it, do you? This isn't about Emily, it's about you and me. We've been miserable for years, and you were too blind to see it. His words stung, but I refused to back down. Well, congratulations, Todd. You've made your bed, and now you can lie in it. Alone. With that, I turned and walked away, leaving him standing there on the sidewalk. As I climbed into my car, tears streamed down my face, but I also felt a sense of relief. Relief that I had finally seen the truth, and relief that I had taken the first step towards getting the justice I deserved. The battle lines had been drawn, and I was ready for war. In the aftermath of my confrontation with Todd and Emily, I found myself retreating into a dark place. The sense of betrayal and anger burned like a fire inside me, clouding my thoughts and consuming my every waking moment. It was during this time that Leslie reached out to me again. We hadn't spoken since before my discovery of Todd's affair, and her call was a welcome reprieve from the turmoil that had become my life. Kylie, how are you holding up? She asked, her voice laced with concern. I sighed heavily. Not great, if I'm being honest. I caught Todd with the other woman, and it was ugly. Oh, honey, I'm so sorry. That must have been devastating. You have no idea, I replied bitterly. The things he said to me, the way he tried to justify his actions, it was like I didn't even know him anymore. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and then Leslie spoke again, her tone more hesitant this time. Kylie, there's something else I need to tell you. My heart sank. What is it? I recently started seeing someone new. His name is David, and he's been wonderful, but... I felt a knot forming in the pit of my stomach. But what? There have been some red flags, Leslie continued. Little things that remind me of how Todd used to treat you. I'm worried I might be walking into another toxic situation. My blood ran cold. The thought of my best friend going through the same kind of hell I was enduring was unbearable. What kind of red flags? I asked, my voice low and serious. Leslie hesitated, and then she began to recount the little ways in which David's behavior had started to mirror Todd's. The occasional dismissive comment, the subtle attempts at control, the gaslighting when she tried to voice her concerns. As I listened, my anger towards Todd only grew stronger. How dare he treat me, treat us, like that? How dare he try to manipulate and control the people I loved most in this world? Leslie, you need to get out of that relationship, I said firmly. Don't make the same mistakes I did. Don't ignore the warning signs. There was a long pause, and then Leslie spoke again, her voice thick with emotion. You're right, Kylie. I can't let myself be blindsided again, not after everything you've been through. In that moment, I knew what I had to do. Todd had hurt me in the most profound way imaginable, but he wouldn't get away with it, not this time. Leslie, I need your help, I said, my voice steely with determination. I'm going to take Todd down, and I want you by my side. There was no hesitation this time. Whatever you need, Kylie. I'm with you, 100%. As we began to lay out our plans for revenge, a sense of purpose washed over me. Todd had made a grave mistake in underestimating the strength of our friendship, and he was going to pay dearly for it. The tide was turning, and this time, I was the one holding all the cards. With Leslie's help, I began to piece together a clearer picture of Todd's manipulation and deceit. It turned out that his affair with Emily was just the tip of the iceberg. He had been emotionally and financially abusive towards me for years, slowly chipping away at my self-worth and independence. As Leslie recounted her own experiences with David, she realized that he had been exhibiting similar patterns of behavior, ones that she had initially brushed off or rationalized away. But now, with the benefit of hindsight and my perspective, the truth became painfully clear. I can't believe I almost let myself fall into that trap again, Leslie said, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and relief. If you hadn't been there to open my eyes, Kylie, I don't know where I'd be right now. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. That's what friends are for. We've got each other's backs, no matter what. A steely determination settled over us as we began to formulate our plan. We knew that taking down Todd wouldn't be easy. He was a master manipulator, and he had a way of twisting the truth to suit his own agenda. But we also knew that we had something he didn't: each other. We need evidence, Leslie said, her brow furrowed in thought. Concrete proof of his misdeeds that he can't talk his way out of. I nodded, already formulating a plan. I'll hire a private investigator to dig into his financial records, his dealings at work, anything that could be used against him. Leslie's eyes lit up. And I can continue to play dumb with David, feed his ego, and make him think he's got me wrapped around his finger. That way, he'll let his guard down and reveal more of his true colors. A slow smile spread across my face. It's perfect. We'll gather all the evidence we need, and then we'll strike when he least expects it. Over the next few weeks, our plan fell into motion. The private investigator uncovered a trail of financial misconduct and shady business dealings that would have been enough to ruin Todd's career and reputation on their own. And Leslie, bless her heart, played the role of the doting, clueless girlfriend to perfection, all the while secretly documenting David's increasingly toxic behavior. As the pieces fell into place, a sense of grim satisfaction washed over me. Todd had always underestimated the bond between Leslie and me, thinking that he could pit us against each other or manipulate us into submission. But he was wrong. Our friendship was stronger than his lies, our determination more powerful than his deception. And soon he would learn that lesson the hard way. As Leslie and I pored over the evidence we had gathered against Todd and David, a sense of grim determination settled over us. We knew that taking them down wouldn't be easy, but we were ready to do whatever it took to see justice served. That's when Megan, my daughter, got involved. "Mom, what's going on?" she asked, eyes wide with concern. "You and Aunt Leslie have been holed up in here for days, and you both look like you're plotting a heist or something." I exchanged a glance with Leslie, silently debating how much to tell her. In the end, I decided that honesty was the best policy. Megan was an adult, and she deserved to know the truth. "Sit down, honey," I said, gesturing to the couch. "There's something we need to tell you." Over the next hour, Leslie and I laid out the entire sordid tale: Todd's affair, his emotional and financial abuse, and our plan to take him down once and for all. Megan listened intently, her expression shifting from shock to anger as she processed the information. "That son of a bitch," she muttered when we finished, her hands clenched into fists. "How could he do that to you, Mom? To all of us?" I reached out and placed a hand on her arm, offering what little comfort I could. "I know, sweetie. Believe me, I know." Megan took a deep breath, her eyes blazing with determination. "Well, count me in. Whatever you need, I'm here to help." A slow smile spread across Leslie's face. "Actually, there might be something you can do for us." It turned out that Megan's position as a high-level executive at a major tech company gave her access to resources that could prove invaluable in our quest for revenge. With her help, we were able to dig even deeper into Todd's financial misdeeds, uncovering a web of fraud and corruption that stretched back years. "This is bigger than we thought," Megan said grimly, scrolling through the damning evidence on her laptop. "If we play our cards right, we could not only ruin his reputation, but also have him facing criminal charges." A sense of vindictive satisfaction washed over me. After everything Todd had put us through, the idea of seeing him face real consequences for his actions was almost too good to be true. Almost. As the three of us put the finishing touches on our plan, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride and gratitude, not just for the strength and resilience of my daughter and my best friend, but also for the unwavering bond that had carried us through even the darkest of times. Todd had made a grave mistake in underestimating the power of our love and loyalty, and now he was going to pay the ultimate price. The day of reckoning arrived sooner than any of us expected. Todd had scheduled a meeting at his office, no doubt to discuss some shady business deal or another. Little did he know, we had been tipped off, and we had a surprise waiting for him. As Leslie, Megan, and I made our way into the building, I could feel the adrenaline coursing through my veins. This was it, the moment we had been planning for, the moment when Todd would finally face the consequences of his actions. We reached his office, and I took a deep breath before knocking firmly on the door. "Come in," Todd's voice called out, oblivious to the storm that was about to be unleashed. I pushed open the door, and we filed in one by one. Todd's eyes widened in surprise as he took us in, his gaze lingering on Leslie and Megan. "Kylie, what's going on here?" he demanded, his brow furrowed in confusion. I stepped forward, my hands trembling with a potent mix of nerves and anticipation. "We know, Todd. We know everything." His expression hardened, and he opened his mouth to respond, but I cut him off. "Don't bother denying it. We have proof. Proof of your affair, your emotional abuse, your financial misdeeds. It's all right here." I held up a thick manila envelope, stuffed to the brim with damning evidence. Todd's face paled, and he glanced around the room, his eyes darting from one of us to the next. "This is ridiculous," he sputtered. "You can't just barge in here and make these kinds of accusations." "Oh, but we can," Leslie chimed in, her voice dripping with disdain. "And we have. You see, Todd, you made a big mistake underestimating us. You thought you could play us against each other, manipulate us and control us like you always have." Megan stepped forward, her expression steely. "But you were wrong. We're stronger than your lies, stronger than your deceit, and we're not going to let you get away with it anymore." As if on cue, the door opened again, and a pair of security guards entered, flanked by a man in a crisp suit, no doubt a lawyer or a law enforcement officer. "Todd Parker," the man said, his voice grave, "you're under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, and a host of other financial crimes." Todd's eyes widened in panic, and he whirled around to face me, his expression a twisted mask of rage and disbelief. You did this? You're ruining my life." I met his gaze unflinchingly, a sense of profound satisfaction settling over me. "No, Todd, you ruined your own life the moment you decided to betray your family and break the law. This is just the consequences catching up to you." As the security guards moved in to apprehend him, Todd struggled and fought, hurling insults and threats at us. But it was too late. The wheels of justice were already in motion. Outside, a crowd had begun to gather, alerted by the commotion and the presence of the authorities. And as Todd was led out in handcuffs, his expensive suit rumpled, and his face contorted in fury, Megan pulled out her phone and began live-streaming the whole thing. Within minutes, the story had gone viral. Todd's misdeeds and downfall laid bare for the world to see. His reputation was in tatters, his career in ruins, all because he had underestimated the power of 3 determined women who refused to be victims any longer. As I watched him being loaded into the back of a police car, a profound sense of closure washed over me. The nightmare was finally over, and justice had been served. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly free. In the aftermath of Todd's dramatic downfall, life as we knew it changed completely. The criminal charges and financial repercussions left him practically destitute, his once lavish lifestyle reduced to a mere shadow of its former self. As for me, Leslie, and Megan, a profound sense of relief and vindication washed over us. We had taken our power back, refusing to be victims of Todd's manipulation and lies any longer. And in the process, we had forged an unbreakable bond that would carry us through whatever challenges life threw our way. It was during this time that Leslie approached me with an idea, one that would not only help us move forward, but also allow us to reclaim our passions and dreams. "Kylie, do you remember how you always wanted to be an architect?" she asked one day over coffee. I nodded, a wistful smile tugging at my lips. "Of course, but that was a long time ago before." My voice trailed off, the painful memories of sacrificing my ambitions for Todd still raw. Leslie reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Well, why don't you go back to school? It's never too late to chase your dreams." At first, the idea seemed preposterous. I was in my mid-40s, with a lifetime of baggage and responsibilities weighing me down. How could I possibly start over now? But then I remembered the strength and determination that had carried us through our ordeal with Todd. If we could take down a man like that, surely I could find the courage to pursue my long-abandoned passion. "You know what? You're right," I said, a sense of excitement bubbling up within me. "I'm going to do it. I'm going to become an architect, just like I always wanted." Leslie's face split into a wide grin, her eyes shining with pride. "That's my girl. And you know what? I have an idea that could help us both. It turned out that Leslie had always harbored a love for interior design, a passion that had been stifled by her own toxic relationship with David. Together, we hatched a plan to start our own firm, combining my architectural skills with her eye for design. With Megan's help and support, we navigated the bureaucratic hurdles and secured the necessary licenses and permits. Before we knew it, our dream had become a reality. A thriving business built on the foundation of our unwavering friendship and resilience. As the months passed, our client list grew, and our reputation for excellence spread like wildfire. We poured our hearts and souls into every project, infusing each design with a piece of ourselves. The strength we had found in our darkest moments, the determination to create something beautiful from the ashes of our pain. And through it all, we never lost sight of the lessons we had learned from our ordeal with Todd. We knew the value of loyalty, of trust, and of never underestimating the power of a few committed individuals to change the course of their lives. As for Todd, his fate was sealed, a cautionary tale of what happens when greed and ego consume a person's soul. He faded into obscurity, left to grapple with the consequences of his actions while we soared to new heights, unburdened by his toxic presence. In the end, our story was one of redemption, of finding the courage to chase our dreams and build a life on our own terms. And as I looked around at the incredible women who had become my family, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, we would face them together, stronger, wiser, and infinitely more resilient than before.